Every butler has secrets, but this one died with his. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallo. Share in the comments. Where are you watching from? Your thoughts make this channel a true community. It was on the last weekend of March, when London was still half shivering from winter's grasp, that Sir Henry Ventnor hosted his annual dinner at Ashcombe House, a stately red-brick estate tucked in the quiet folds of Kent. The air that evening had been heavy with the scent of early camellias and the low murmur of wealth at leisure. To those in attendance, the evening promised nothing more than fine wine, excellent company, and the subtle pleasure of watching Sir Henry's guests circle one another in polite conversational duels. No one expected the butler to die. Ashcombe House's butler, Mr. Edwin Greaves, had served the Ventnor family for 32 years. Reserved to the point of opacity, he was the sort of man who could glide into a room unnoticed and yet exert a quiet control over it. He knew every quirk of the house, every preference of its master, and, more importantly, every indiscretion of its guests. It was this last quality, perhaps, that made his sudden death less a tragedy and more an unsettling event. The discovery was made shortly before midnight, after the dinner had concluded and the guests had retired to the drawing-room for brandy. Greaves had failed to return with the decanter Sir Henry had requested. Lady Ventnor, growing impatient, sent one of the maids to find him. 10 minutes later, the maid stumbled back, her face the colour of paper, and whispered something to Sir Henry that drained the ruddy cheer from his cheeks. Within moments, the drawing-room emptied in a flurry of silk skirts and murmured speculation. Greaves was found in the service passage leading to the wine cellar, lying neatly on his side as though he had chosen the spot for a brief rest. But the stillness of his body was absolute, and his eyes, half-lidded, held that curious fixedness that speaks of life departed. The doctor, summoned at once, was quick to pronounce the death unnatural. A small glass lay shattered nearby, the amber stain of brandy seeping into the flagstones. There was, too, a faint scent, something bitter, metallic, that lingered in the air, as though a ghost of the poison remained to mock the living. The gathering that night was, by nature, a closed circle. Besides Sir and Lady Ventnor there were Miss Evelyn Ashcombe, Sir Henry's young niece, whose recent engagement had caused a mild ripple of gossip among the county set; Mr. Leonard Partridge, a retired barrister known for his exacting standards and his habit of listening more than he spoke; Mrs. Clarissa Melrose, a widowed friend of Lady Ventnor's, charming but with a gaze that appraised more than it admired; Mr. Julian Frobisher, a financier with an unfortunate tendency to boast, though his invitations to Ashcombe House never seemed to lapse; Colonel Roger Fanshawe, an old army comrade of Sir Henry's, bluff and genial, though tonight his affability had seemed strained. And now, with the butler dead, they were no longer merely guests. They were witnesses, perhaps suspects. It was Sir Henry who, at 1 o'clock in the morning, telephoned London. His words were clipped, his tone a curious mix of reluctance and relief. Yes, I will require the services of a detective. Not the local constabulary, no. This is delicate. It must be handled with precision. There was a pause, the soft clink of glass as he poured himself another drink. Yes, Inspector. I know exactly whom to ask for. Hercule Poirot. The morning broke clear and indifferent to the events of the night. Frost had traced its delicate lace on the lower panes, and the lawns beyond Ashcombe House shone with a pale glitter that made even the gravel seem newly set. At 9:30, when the household could no longer pretend that breakfast was an ordinary meal, a taxi crunched up the drive and delivered a compact figure with an immaculate moustache and a hat whose brim made a neat line in the bright air. Hercule Poirot stepped out, as if the day itself had been arranged to his specification. Sir Henry met him in the vestibule with the over-heartiness of a man who wishes to be reassured, and knows he will not be. Poirot's greeting was courteous, almost delicate. His eyes, however, went not to Sir Henry, but to the umbrella stand, the arrangement of sticks and canes, the small trail of melted frost leading inward, and the narrow scuff on the tiles, darker than the rest, which suggested a hurried foot and a burden carried low. He observed them as one observes notes in a well-loved score, seen, registered, and placed in the mind without comment. "You will forgive," Sir Henry said, "that we have kept the scene as it was. The doctor insisted the body should not be moved until you or the police." Poirot inclined his head. "Très bien. The doctor is a man of good sense. Before all the emotions, we must have the order. But first, I think, you will do me the kindness to present me to your guests and to those who serve in your house. A house, Sir Henry, is a little universe. If one star goes dark, all the others change their light." They went together to the breakfast room. The bowls of hyacinths on the sideboard had been pushed a fraction back, as if their scent might offend grief. Lady Ventnor sat with a coffee cup between her hands, and did not drink. Her gaze moved restlessly from person to person, as if keeping count. Miss Evelyn Ashcombe, slim and pale with a beauty that looked unfinished, like a portrait not yet glazed, stood by the window. Mr. Partridge, solid and contained, folded his napkin with the precision of a brief. Mrs. Melrose, in a dark silk that shone like oil, attempted to smile, and did not quite accomplish it. Mr. Frobisher, broad of chest and too ready with his sleeve-links, stared at Poirot as men stare at a banker who may decide their fate. Colonel Fanshawe, a scar along one cheek, giving his geniality an odd authority, rose at once and bowed. Poirot made the little bow that in other men would have been a flourish. "Mesdames, messieurs, you are kind. It is a disagreeable business, yes, but we will put it in order. For the present, I beg you not to leave the house, nor to send any letters or telegrams. The truth, she is shy. One does not chase her. One sets the chair by the fire and leaves the door a little open." Lady Ventnor shivered. "You make it sound almost domestic, Monsieur Poirot. But certainly, the crime is the most domestic of affairs. It is the quarrel brought to its conclusion, the anxiety driven to an extreme. We will not make of it a melodrama when it is so often simple, only, as Sir Henry says, delicate." He took no food, but requested a pot of chocolate, and, when it came, sipped it with a rapt gaze, as if the cup held the exact thought he wanted. "Now," he said softly, "you will take me, if you please, to where the unfortunate Mr. Greaves was found." The service passage was narrow and clean, with paint the colour of good cream, and floors that had been scrubbed with a thoroughness bordering on devotion. The air was cooler here. Scents lingered more stubbornly. Poirot paused at the turn, where the corridor bent toward the wine-cellar and the scullery, and lifted his head a fraction. Sir Henry watched him, uneasy and a little fascinated, as one watches a musician pause before the cadenza. There was the faint tang of something not of the house, not soap nor polish, nor the ghost of roasting from the distant kitchens. Bitter, yes, and clean in a way that did not belong to food or drink. "You see?" Sir Henry asked, half whispering, as if the walls might listen. "Even still there's an odour. The doctor thought, well, he said it was likely poison. The glass—" Poirot regarded the shards on the flagged floor, tidy in their disorder, as if death had been a careful man. "The glass, yes. It is curious. One expects the greater piece to bear the lip mark. Here they are small, none with the crescent. A towel? He was supplied with one by a woman who had come up quiet as a cat. Mrs. Bright, the housekeeper, small and brisk, with a face worn into lines that were not unkind. Her hands were reddened by work and effort. Her eyes, quick and observant, flicked to Sir Henry and back to Poirot. "We left it all as we found it, sir. Only put a screen so the maids wouldn't have to pass him. And where, Poirot asked, is Mr. Greaves now? In the cold room, sir, until the coroner comes. The doctor said as much. Mrs. Bright hesitated. It wouldn't be right to leave him where he fell. No, you did very right. You have served in this house long, madame? 14 years, sir. Mr. Greaves had 32. Poirot inclined his head, deeply respectful. You will. Give me the list of the keys he carried, and you will tell me if any were not in their proper place. Mrs. Bright did not start. She seemed to have waited for the question. He carried the master ring always, sir. As for one missing, there wasn't, but one was out of place. The cellar key was at the end, not where he kept it. I noticed when I took them for Sir Henry. Sir Henry's mouth tightened, an honest man, embarrassed by necessity. I could not think where they were, and Mrs. Bright suggested, well, she thought it better if we kept them safe, for the moment. May we? When a captain falls, another must carry the map. Poirot's tone was neutral, almost mild, but he looked again at the key ring and the laid-out shards and the small stain where brandy had darkened the stone. He crouched, not touching, and followed with his eyes the pattern of marks, the faint scrape where a shoe had twisted, the almost invisible splash beyond the main stain that suggested the glass had broken after it was set down, not dropped in the act of drinking. He straightened, brushed a non-existent speck from his cuff. Tell me, Sir Henry, your brandy, it is kept in the cellar? Yes. Greaves kept the best in a locked cage down there. The Armagnac, a few ancient ports, a curious bottle of eau de vie my father favoured. And last night you asked for the Ventnor Armagnac, the 1893, a family tradition after the March dinner. Greaves knew. Poirot nodded. He knew, and yet he did not return. Who among the household might go to the cellar besides Mr. Greaves? No one, Mrs. Bright answered at once. Not unless sent and with a key. Mr. Greaves had the only cellar key on the master ring. The cook has a duplicate to the pantry, the maids to the linen presses, and Thomas, that is the footman, to the plate pantry only. Then we will speak to Thomas, Poirot said. We will speak to all, but first the footman. Thomas, when produced, was young and careful with his words, the way young men are who are trying on respectability like a new coat, and are not sure it fits. He was fair, with a lock of hair that would not stay in place, and hands that did not quite know where to rest. You assisted last night? Yes, sir, in the drawing-room and at table. Mr. Greaves fetched the wine himself. He said it looked better if he did. And he went alone to the cellar? Yes, sir. He didn't like anyone underfoot down there. Poirot studied him. If there were a decanter placed by mistake, would you know? If the wrong brandy were brought? Thomas flushed, pleased to be expert. Oh, yes, sir. Mr. Greaves had a way of warming the glass in his hand before he poured, just so. He mimed it, the glass cradled in the palm. He said the first scent is half the pleasure. You could tell the difference. His face altered. Only last night. He didn't pour at all. Comment. I mean, sir, he brought the decanter. Only he didn't. Forgive me. He left to fetch it. He never came back? Poirot's eyes softened. You were fond of him. Thomas swallowed. He was strict, sir, but fair. Said a house is a clock and each of us the cog. Take out one and the whole thing stops. A philosophy of precision, Poirot murmured. It is most sympathetic. He turned to Sir Henry. I will see the cellar next. After, I will ask the great courtesy to speak to your guests one by one. Not formal, not yet. Only to make the little acquaintance. The cellar was a cool sigh of stone and shadow. Bottles lay in their racks like sleepers in neat rows. The cage in the far corner held a dozen more venerable shapes, their labels browned to the colour of tea. Poirot looked not at the bottles first, but at the floor. the faint track where damp had darkened the dust into two parallel lines, as if something on small wheels had passed recently. He bent, touched, and found the dusty print of a palm at knee height on the cage door. Left hand, 3 fingers clearly, the fourth blurred. The lock itself was ordinary, the keyhole bright with use. "Someone moved the trolley?" Sir Henry asked. "We use it for bringing up crates at Christmas. I did not think—" Poirot lifted a hand. "It is of no consequence. Yet, tell me, which is the Armagnac of 1893? Sir Henry pointed, and Poirot regarded the bottle with the seriousness of a bishop before a relic. He did not touch it. He looked instead at the shelf below, where a space showed between 2 dusty fellows, the clean rectangle like a mouth that had closed over a word. "A bottle was here," he said softly. "Recently." Sir Henry frowned. "Greaves sometimes moved things when he took inventory. He was the only one who could read his own system." "Ah, a system that worked for him. For me, it is enough to know that the order, she is disturbed." He turned, and in doing so noted the small metal tag tied to the Armagnac's neck with cord. The tag was reversed, its writing facing inward. Mrs. Bright, who had followed discreetly, took a breath, then let it go, as if she had been about to speak, and thought better of it. "Madame?" She met his eyes. "He would never leave a tag turned in, sir. It looks untidy." "Just so." Poirot's gaze lingered on the tag a heartbeat more, and then he stepped back. "We have done enough for the moment. We will return the door as we found it, the key to its place, and we will thank the seller for its hospitality." He shut the cage and listened to the small satisfaction of the lock. They went up, and the warmth of the house received them gratefully. Poirot requested a small room near the library, and a table and 2 chairs, so that I may make the little conversations. Lady Ventnor sent for the morning post, which had been left unopened out of a sense of propriety, and for a tray which, arriving, bore on it cut lemons, biscuits, and, at Poirot's mild request, a small pot of salt. He placed the salt near his right hand as if it were a paperweight. He asked first for Mrs. Melrose and spoke with her about the weather, then about the hyacinths, and only at the last allowed the conversation to turn toward the dead man. She admired Greaves, she said, because he never allowed a scene. "Even death," she added, "he made neat." Her smile trembled and was gone. Poirot let her go with a word of thanks, and asked for Mr. Frobisher. Frobisher was less at ease. "Beastly business. Look here, I don't see how a man like that comes to poison. He didn't drink much, wouldn't take a cigar. Odd, that, for a butler." "Not odd," Poirot said, "for a man who loved his work. Tell me, monsieur, you spoke with him yesterday?" "Ah, casually, about the claret at dinner. He corrected me, you know, but in that damned polite way. Said the 2009 showed better at room temperature." Frobisher laughed shortly. He was right. Partridge the barrister came next, grave and self-possessed. He had known Greaves professionally, as all gentlemen know the servants of their friends, and volunteered nothing until asked, at which point he volunteered exactly the right amount and no more. Colonel Fanshawe, on the other hand, was heartier than the occasion demanded. He had found Greaves the very model what, and then, with a rough sincerity that sat awkwardly with his moustache, confessed that the man had once brought him a blanket when the fire in the east room wouldn't draw. I'd sat there like an ass, too proud to admit I was freezing. He saw, didn't say a word. Just the blanket. Evelyn Ashcombe, last, because Poirot asked for her last, came with reluctance and sat very straight in the chair opposite him. Up close, she was younger than she had seemed by the window, and the cool water of her eyes suggested a mind that kept its own counsel. "You are engaged, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "It is an occasion of joy. Mr. Greaves, he wished you happiness." Her hands tightened in her lap. "He wished me good sense." "Ah!" Poirot's eyes warmed. "That is perhaps more useful," she said after a moment. "He knew things about this house, not gossip, facts. Sometimes he would speak if he thought one was about to do something foolish." "And yesterday?" "He told me," she said, and the words were steady, "not to change a decision because someone was watching, that if I wanted to be brave, I should do it when no one could see." Poirot inclined his head. "It is excellent advice. And now, mademoiselle, I trouble you no more." When the door closed behind her, he took up the pot of salt and turned it slightly, as if aligning it with the edge of the table. Sir Henry, who had hovered and at last could no longer hover, came in with visible relief. "You see how it is, Monsieur Poirot. A house full of good people, and yet, Poirot said, "a man lies dead, and the bottle on the shelf makes a little shadow that should not be there. You will, if you please, make a small announcement to your guests, that tonight, after dinner, we will gather in the drawing-room and speak together of Mr. Greaves. Until then, there will be no more talk of police, and no telegrams. The telephone, if it must be used, will be used in my presence." Sir Henry hesitated. "You think the murderer will telephone?" Poirot's smile was very small. "I think the murderer has already spoken. It is only that we have not yet learned which sentence was the confession." He rose, and his eyes went briefly to the window, where the frost still clung in stubborn corners. "It is cold today. Cold is orderly. It keeps the edges sharp. Let us be as the cold, Sir Henry, and not allow the warmth of pity to soften what must be seen." He went out then to walk once more the clean passage to the cellar steps, and as he passed the little bell by the service door, a bell seldom used, its pull cord smoothed by the hands of years, he touched the tassel lightly and noted, with satisfaction, that he did not trouble to explain, the faint ring of dust that had been disturbed not by a hand that pulled, but by a hand that steadied itself in fear or haste. It was a small thing. In such small things, Hercule Poirot found that the human soul could not help but leave its print. Poirot did not return at once to the drawing-room. The house's back stair, the one servants used from habit, even when the front was free, took him up to the second floor with a measured creak that told of good wood and older varnish. Mrs. Bright, by instinct or design, was waiting at the landing before he reached it. She had a ring of keys in her hand that she did not jingle. "You would like to see Mr. Greaves's room, sir?" "If you please." It was small and astonishingly tidy, a cell more than a room, with a narrow bed, a wardrobe, a chair, and a table on which lay a black-covered ledger and a pair of wire spectacles folded as exactly as a signature. There was no photograph, no ornament, nothing to suggest a life outside the neat business of service. The one concession to comfort was a woolen throw on the chair's back. The one concession to pleasure, a book of Virgil in a school edition, its edges worn by careful thumbs. Poirot did not touch the ledger first. He went to the wardrobe, inhaled the faint odours of soap and camphor, and noted that the Sunday suit had been brushed and turned with the care of a man who meant to wear it soon. He crouched to examine the row of shoes, and found the walking boots clean, the polish fresh, the edges of the soles unfrayed. A man who went out when he did, like a gentleman. He straightened and looked again at the table. The ledger lay square to the grain of the wood. The pencil upon it pointed exactly to the left. Mrs. Bright said, in a voice that had been kept even, "For years. He would not like us to stand here, sir. He always said a room holds a person's measure after he's left it, and so we will not disturb it more than we must." Poirot opened the ledger with 2 fingers. Columns in a fine small hand ran like neat hedges down the page. Dates, bottles moved, bottles returned, corks checked, levels marked. On yesterday's line The entry for the Armagnac 1893 had a dot beside it, not a check. There was a second dot next to a line 2 shelves below, a bottle recorded as eau de vie, provenance uncertain, placed years ago and rarely consulted. A small note in the margin read, "Replace cord, tag frayed, 11th March." Poirot's eyes went to the corner where a stub of string lay in the dish that held the spectacles. New cord had been cut. He turned one page back. On the previous Friday, there was a different kind of note, in the same steady hand but angled slightly, as if the writer had not sat down to make it. Ventnor Library, duplicate returned. Returned to whom? He closed the book gently and glanced at the small drawer in the table. It held collar studs, blank envelopes, and tucked beneath a folded handkerchief, a pawn ticket dated 3 years ago for a silver watch. The name given was not Greaves. The number matched a practice tidy enough to be his. If the house held secrets, the Butlers were not in it. "Did he receive visitors here?" Poirot asked. Mrs. Bright shook her head. "Never, sir. If the tradespeople came, he met them below. If family, well, he had none. Not that we knew. You liked him. I respected him." Her tone admitted no more and no less. "Respect, she is the stronger coin." Poirot closed the drawer. "The maid who found him is called Annie," Mrs. Bright said. "Annie Blatch. She's not long in service. I sent her with the message because she has a good step. I did not know she would be the one to find him. Then we will save her until last. It is better for the very young to speak when the fear has had time to settle into words." He paused by the window, whose single pane gave onto the stable yard and the strip of kitchen garden made square by string. The frost lay thick where the sun had not reached. A small footprint, narrow-heeled and recent, had marked the far edge of the gravel. A woman's shoe, he thought, though in a household like this the distinction was less than in town. Scullery girls wore what they could afford. "You will have the kindness to tell me, Mrs. Bright, if Mr. Greaves spoke in confidence this week to any among the staff." She took a breath. "He had words with Thomas. Not harsh, sir, but words." "The subject?" "Keys," she said. Thomas had left the plate pantry key in the lock while he went to fetch wood for the dining-room fire. Mr. Greaves said a key must never tell the world where it lives. "Wise," Poirot murmured. "And among the guests?" Mrs. Bright's hands tightened around the ring of keys at last, not from fear but to keep them from speaking for her. "I could not say what was said, but I observed that the gentleman with the cuff-links, Mr. Frobisher, raised his voice when Mr. Greaves told him the library was closed for the night. He wanted a book. Mr. Greaves said Sir Henry's rule was no guest unaccompanied after 11. "The hour matters," Poirot said softly. "It always matters." When she had gone, he looked once more at the ledger and the little pot of cord. Then, with the precise care of habit, he aligned the pencil so that it pointed neatly toward the room's door. He left it that way. Downstairs, the house had set itself to the rhythm of a day one step out of joint. Trays came and went without the secret spring of Greaves's timing. Conversations began and broke off, as if bumped by a thought too large to fit the space between sentences. In the library, Sir Henry's chair looked as if it had been sat in and left quickly. Poirot's eyes took in the blotter, the pen hooked back in its rest, the little velvet-lined drawer that held a collection of odd keys, garden gate, gunroom, a small box with a brass tag reading plate. The drawer showed, in the right-hand corner of the velvet, a bare patch where something had lately lain and no longer did. The dust in that patch had been disturbed and not by a cloth. He touched the edge with a fingernail and, satisfied, let it be. "You kept a duplicate to the silver safe, yes?" he said when Sir Henry came. "For emergencies," Sir Henry admitted. "Greaves insisted. He said a gentleman ought not to be hostage to a single key. I confess I rarely thought of it. And now it is there." Sir Henry pulled the drawer to show him. Only the little place where it rests is new, and the velvet about it shows an outline a shade larger than the key itself. Something else lay here until recently." "What, Sir Henry?" Sir Henry coloured, not with guilt, but with the embarrassment of domestic revelation. "A seal, my father's. I had it out yesterday to mark the envelopes for the dinner invitations next month. I put it back. Greaves would have thought me a schoolboy if I'd left it about. And this seal, does it open any device?" No, it is only a trifle. A crest." "Trifles," Poirot said mildly, "are the loose threads with which one knits a whole. You will forgive me if I ask for another trifle. Your telephone." Sir Henry led him to the small study where the house telephone was kept. Poirot lifted the earpiece and, without speaking, listened. The line gave its steady breath. He replaced it and set his finger on the cradle as one might rest a hand on a dog's head. "If there is a call for any guest this morning," he said, "I will take it first." At luncheon, the guests assembled as if the ritual could restore the day to itself. Poirot took little, but he was hungry for manner and habit. Mr. Frobisher ate with a mouth that pressed its lips together after each bite, as if refusing to let anything escape. Words, perhaps, or temper. Mrs. Melrose salted her soup, tasted, then asked for a lemon from the tray that had appeared on Poirot's request. She squeezed it carefully, not to spill a drop. Partridge wiped his knife before cutting bread, an old club instinct. Colonel Fanshawe told a story that did not quite land. Evelyn Ashcombe drank water and kept her eyes on her plate until Lady Ventnor, with sudden kindness, touched her hand. The telephone rang once during the fish. Sir Henry half rose. Poirot, with a word of apology, went himself. He lifted the receiver and said, in a tone that could have been anyone's but his, "Ashcombe House." There was a pause, and then a voice, low and curiously flat. "Is the library door unlocked? Who is calling, s'il vous plaît?" The line clicked dead. Poirot stood with the receiver still at his ear a moment longer, then returned to the table as if nothing had occurred. He took his place with an apology for delaying the sauce and met no one's eyes. After luncheon, he sent for Annie Blatch. She came twisting the hem of her apron in her hands, but stood up straight when she reached the study. She had the fine, sallow skin of the country and the quick look of a girl who learns by watching. "You found Mr. Greaves," Poirot said gently. "You were brave." "I wasn't," she said at once, and then pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. "I ran." "Running is sometimes the bravest thing." He let the silence be kind, and then, in the same tone with which one asks a child to recall a path home, "Tell me exactly what you did, from when her ladyship sent you." "I went along the passage and down the step. I called Mr. Greaves, sir." And he didn't answer. I saw his feet first. He was lying as if he'd set himself down careful. I thought he'd fainted. I went to him, and then she swallowed. The smell. It hurt my nose like polish, but not. "You touched him." "I touched his sleeve to shake him. Then I ran back. The glass was broke. I didn't break it." "You did not. Did you see anyone else in the passage?" She shook her head. "Only the bell cord moved a bit when I went by. I thought it was my skirt." Poirot's glance flicked to the faint dust ring he had noticed earlier. "Perhaps. And earlier in the evening, did you see Mr. Greaves pass this way with a decanter?" "I was in the pantry then, sir. I saw him go to the stairs with the keys in his hand. He had his gloves on, the thin ones. He always did for the bottles." "Ah!" Poirot let the picture settle. The thin gloves, the keys, the careful man. "You have done very well, Annie. One last thing. Yesterday, did you see any of the gentlemen in the service passage?" She hesitated, not out of fear, but to be exact. "The Colonel, sir. He came to the kitchen door before dinner and asked cook for mustard the other sort. Mr. Greaves told him the footman would bring it, and he said he liked to ask for himself. Not rude. Just, he likes to ask." "Merci." Poirot dismissed her with a kindness that sent her straighter than she had come. He stood a long time after she had gone, looking not at the desk, but at the small heap of Morning Post Sir Henry had left on it, the house's letters laid atop a single envelope, addressed in a precise, slightly old-fashioned hand to Mr. Edwin Greaves, Ashcombe House. Forwarded from 6 Whitstable Lane ran a faint pencilled line in the corner. Poirot turned it over. The seal was unbroken. He raised his brows to Sir Henry, and with that gentleman's grave nod, he slid a paper knife beneath the flap. Inside was one sheet, half a page, and a small card torn from a calendar. The card was for Tuesday the 25th, and on its back someone had written 11 o'clock in ink that had bled once and then dried. On the sheet, in the same hand, was a line without preface or signature. "The cellar key is not safe. You will understand why." Poirot read it twice. He held the calendar piece to the light and saw, faintly impressed, a second line that had not taken ink. "The library." He placed both items on the blotter as one might place a candlestick and a knife in a puzzle, each where it belonged. "Who knows this hand?" he asked. Sir Henry stared and shook his head. Partridge, when shown the line, said only that the writing had the clerk's habit. Lady Ventnor blanched. Mrs. Melrose looked rather than saw. Frobisher frowned, as if the words ought to arrange themselves differently. Colonel Fanshawe peered and declared the letters deuced fussy. Evelyn Ashcombe glanced and said unexpectedly, "It looks like a woman's, but not a young one." Poirot returned the paper to the desk. "A kindness was attempted," he said softly, "or a warning, perhaps both. It is always so with messages about keys." He moved then as if time itself had tapped him on the shoulder. He asked for Thomas once more and went with the young man to the plate pantry. There he examined the lock, tested the key, and observed the small scar along Thomas's knuckle, which the youth explained was from the coal scuttle in the east room. Mrs. Bright, appealed to, confirmed it with the simple authority of truth. Poirot nodded, half to himself, and asked the boy to fetch from the cellar the trolley with the small wheels. When it came, he ran his finger along the metal edge and found, adhered to the underside, a grey smear that was not dust. He did not name it. He took his handkerchief and wiped the smear away with a care that was almost affectionate. "It is a house," he said quietly to Sir Henry when they were alone again. "It has its habits. Yesterday someone acted against those habits and betrayed himself, or herself. A tag turned in, a cord newly cut, a bell that rang only in the dust, a bottle that went from the wrong shelf to the right story, and Mr. Greaves, who loved order, went to set it straight." "Who?" Sir Henry asked, hoarse, and then, with the honesty of a man unused to stealth, "Do you believe it was one of my guests?" "I believe," Poirot said, "that a circle is a comfort, because it tells us where to look. Your circle is small." He smoothed the edge of the blotter with his palm. "Tonight, after dinner, we will speak together. Before then, I will ask 1 or 2 little questions that are impolite, and one that is very impolite indeed. You will forgive me." He went first to Lady Ventnor, and asked her whether Mr. Greaves had ever spoken to her of wills. She flinched as if struck, and said, with a brittle laugh, that old houses generate talk, and old servants collect it. He said nothing in return, and let the silence make her flush. He found Mr. Partridge in the smoking-room, and inquired, as a man inquires of another about fishing, whether he preferred a sealed envelope to an open one. Partridge looked at him quite steadily, and asked if this were a riddle. Poirot smiled, and with the air of a conjurer showing a coin, produced the calendar card. Partridge's eye ticked to it and away. "There are many 11s in a day, Monsieur Poirot." "Just so," Poirot murmured, "but there is only one cellar." He walked the passage once more before the clock chimed 4. He paused again by the bell, and saw, with satisfaction, that the faint ring his finger had traced earlier had been sharpened by the day's draughts into a clearer halo. He looked toward the door to the yard, where the frost had melted to damp and a single print had blurred. He touched the latch, then did not lift it. Inside, the house drew breath for the evening it had been told would come, the evening in which its order would be named aloud. He returned to his little room near the library and sat. He drew the pot of salt toward him, and without tasting or scattering, pinned with it the few facts that had the weight of truth. When he had arranged them to his liking, he allowed himself, for the first time that day, to lean back in his chair. "The outline, she begins to show herself," he said, not to Sir Henry, and not to the room, but to the idea that had been walking with him since he had stepped from the taxi. "Only tell me, whose hand holds the pencil?" The house settled into the long hush of late afternoon, that hour when the winter light seems to stand still, unwilling to commit to evening. Poirot remained seated, the little pot of salt anchoring the paper upon which he had written nothing. He was not a great believer in lists. He preferred the geometry of a matter, the angles by which actions reveal their motives. He rose at last and went to the library, not to search but to acquaint himself with the room as a man acquaints himself with a face, seeing where it smiles and where it cannot. It was a comfortable room and honest about it. The good leather chairs had grown shiny in the arms from use. The rugs were English and unashamed. The flanks of books held their ground without attempting to impress. There was a writing table set not quite square to the window, a tantalus of cut glass, and a small key in a little dish beside it, and on the mantel the Ventnor crest in bronze bore passant over 3 chevrons that had likely overseen arguments and reconciliations more numerous than its chroniclers would admit. Poirot stood a moment before the tantalus. He did not lift a stopper. He observed only that one decanter wore a collar engraved A, another W, and the third S, and that the collar for A had been polished more recently than the others. Beneath the polish, a thin crescent of old tarnish hugged the lower edge, as if reluctant to depart. Sir Henry found him there, and made a little exasperated sound at himself. "I cannot imagine Greaves letting that collar go so long," he said. "He would have seen it from the door." "Just so," Poirot answered. "He saw too much from doors. It is the danger of butlers. They are custodians of entrances." He turned from the tantalus. "You will be kind enough to send to me Mr. Frobisher and, after him, Mr. Partridge. I will also ask that you ring the bell for tea in the drawing-room at exactly 5:30, and when your guests are assembled, say merely that I have begged a small indulgence of them." Sir Henry blinked. "What sort of indulgence?" "One that concerns only the senses. There will be nothing to alarm." Frobisher came heavy-footed and wary, like a man who has decided not to be reasonable and is prepared to be congratulated on it. Poirot, all politeness, waved him to a chair, and without fuss took up the calendar card and the anonymous line about the cellar key. He did not show them. He only placed his fingertips on the table and said, "Monsieur, last night you wished for a book." "I did," Frobisher returned. "Is there some rule in this house that grown men are set to bed at 11 like schoolboys? I meant to ask Sir Henry, but Greaves barred the way as if the Magna Carta were kept in there." "And was Sir Henry in the library at that hour?" "He'd gone up. Told me to borrow anything in the morning." "You were, in fact, redirected." "Redirected," Frobisher said, making the word sound like an insult. "I went to the smoking-room instead." "Alone?" "Fanshawe came in, then Melrose and Partridge. We played at patience with the cards." not for money." He said the last with a sharp look, as if daring Poirot to contradict him. "And after?" "I turned in. Why am I being treated as if I'd knocked the fellow down? I didn't like his manner, that's all. Too much stiff starch for a servant. And don't say it. Yes, he was a paragon, but he was flesh and blood, and flesh bleeds." Poirot's gaze was gentle. "It does, monsieur, but do not bleed on my carpet. I have need of it unsullied. Tell me, you are a man who prides himself on palate, n'est-ce pas? In wine, in spirits?" Frobisher's mouth relaxed a fraction. "I take an interest. I require your assistance. Come with me." Poirot led him to the drawing-room, where the light had turned to pewter, and stopped before the tray upon which Lady Ventnor's maid had set 3 cut-glass goblets at his earlier request. In each, a finger of amber liquid shone, indistinguishable to the eye. "You see? One is brandy from the Tantalus. One is from the bottle of Armagnac 1893, which I requested Sir Henry to have brought up. One is common brandy from the service cupboard. I will ask you only to say which is which." Frobisher brightened in spite of himself. "With pleasure." He lifted the first goblet, warmed it in his palm as Thomas had mimed earlier, put his nose to it, and nodded. "Common brandy. Good, but unremarkable. The second—" He repeated the gesture, inhaled, and frowned. "Also brandy, but there's a back note. Resiny, not Armagnac. The third— Ah!" His face altered to pleasure. "Yes, that's the Armagnac. Dried apricot, a depth you can't fake." Poirot said very softly, "And how, monsieur, would you know what cannot be faked if you have not tasted this house's Armagnac before?" Frobisher's confidence faltered, and then held. He was not an easy man to shame. "I've had Ventnor's Armagnac before," he said stoutly. "Years ago. He served it at a club dinner. I'd know it anywhere." "Precisely so," Poirot agreed, and allowed him that small victory with a nod that took its measure. Frobisher went, not happier, but less bristling. Partridge followed and refused the game. "I am neither sommelier nor hound," he said dryly. "Ask me a question, and I will answer it, if I can." Then a question. "On Friday last, did you return to Mr. Greaves any duplicate that was not your own?" Partridge's eyebrows rose, very direct. "Impolite, as I warned. I returned the duplicate to the library, if that is what you mean." Partridge crossed one knee over the other. Sir Henry's father had a habit of misplacing keys. The late Mr. Ventnor had copies of the library key made, and lodged one with the butler, one with the solicitor, one in the velvet-lined drawer. A childish system, but there it is. And you are the solicitor. I am a retired barrister who serves as a family friend. The Ventnor's solicitor of record is Harbottle, Sharp and Company. But yes, I had occasion to have the duplicate last week, as I was inventorying certain papers with Sir Henry's permission. I returned it on Friday. Mr. Greaves checked me off his little list and said nothing, which is his way of expressing approval. "You did not enter the library last night, after 11. "I did not." "And if someone did, without the key?" Partridge looked at him with interest. "If you mean by window, you would know it. The casement's grown like an old judge, and the latches are stiff. If you mean by lock-pick, no. The library lock is not modern, but it is temperamental. It has the dogged honesty of middle age. It prefers the key it knows." "Merci." Poirot did not detain him. He had learned what he needed. Not the facts. They were in the ledger and the dust, but the quality of the men who spoke them. At 5:30, they assembled for tea. The winter light had deepened to a silvery dimness that made faces kindly and untrustworthy by turns. Poirot stood by the hearth as cups were poured, and with an air that was almost apologetic, asked of them his small indulgence. "I will beg you each," he said, "to do a thing Mr. Greaves did every night of his life, to carry a tray as he would carry it, with the balance and the care. Thomas has placed upon this tray 3 items, each of which is real." He nodded to the footman, who brought forward a silver tray with 3 objects upon it, swaddled in napkins, so their weight would not be guessed too easily. "You will walk from the door to the empty chair and back again. It is a foolishness, yes, but indulge me. I am curious to see how each of you arranges what you cannot see." They smiled, they protested, they performed. Mrs. Melrose balanced the tray lightly, making a little theatre of the curve of her wrist. The napkin slid a hair, and she corrected for it with charm. Colonel Fanshawe took the weight squarely and marched it like a field ration. Partridge steadied the tray against his body slightly, as men do who value certainty over grace. Lady Ventnor tried, and had to be relieved, laughing at herself with relief that sounded like tears nearly avoided. Evelyn carried it smoothly, eyes on the floor not from fear but concentration. Frobisher, who had snorted at the task, lifted the tray in both hands and did well until the return, where he turned too sharply and the middle napkin shifted. He caught it with the side of his palm, not letting the object show. Poirot watched his hand, not his face. "And now," Poirot said, taking back the tray at last, "we thank you for the patience." He set the tray on a side table and unfolded the napkins. The first covered a decanter of water, the second a book, the third a small wooden box with a sliding lid, the sort one might keep matches in. No one, of course, had asked what the objects were until they were revealed. It was the nature of obedience to doubt the question rather than the task. He let the scene disperse itself, and then went to the side table alone. The wooden box had gained, in its passage, a faint finish of sweat on the lid. Fanshawe's hand, perhaps, or Frobisher's, human oils that made the wood look briefly younger. He slid it open enough to see the dull shine of a brass key inside, and shut it again. He had not needed to hide a key, to learn who thought first of keeping what he carried from sight. He had only needed to watch which hand moved without permission. Dinner had the constrained gaiety of a public performance. They attempted talk of the play in town that some had seen, of the frost that would damage the wisteria if it kept up, of a dog show at Tunbridge. Poirot did not rescue them with cleverness. He allowed the discomfort to do its work. Only when the servants had done with the meat and gone, did he say, as if to himself, "I wonder, Sir Henry, whether your library tonight is very different from last night." "I should hope so," Sir Henry answered, startled. "There will be no one trying to use it." "Will there not?" Poirot's tone was mild. "Shall we discover it together?" He took them as a little procession, as though they were walking into a chapel. At the library door he paused and examined, not the key, but the escutcheon, where a faint smear darker than the wood showed a thumb had steadied itself in the same place several times. He put his own thumb to it and felt the shallow dip worn by years. He inserted the key and turned it, then stepped aside to let Sir Henry open. The room received them without surprise. Nothing had been shifted to a casual eye. But Poirot went at once to the writing table and looked, not at the blotter or the pens, but at the velvet-lined drawer. He slid it out. The outline in the velvet where the seal had lain was empty. The seal, which Sir Henry had insisted he returned, was not in the drawer. Sir Henry said, annoyed and a little frightened, "It must be somewhere else." "It is not," Poirot said. "It is in the house, certainly, but it has moved since this afternoon." He shut the drawer. "We will not search. We will simply sit." They sat. The room grew quieter than rooms are meant to grow, and the damp evening pressed its forehead to the panes. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed the quarter. Poirot spoke as gently as a doctor to a child. "Mademoiselle Evelyn, you will forgive that I address you. Last night at 11, did you go to the library?" Her eyes widened, then steadied. "No." "Did you wish to?" "Yes." He bowed, as if she had done him a courtesy. "And you did not, because Mr. Greaves refused you, or because you refused yourself?" Because he told me to be brave when no one could see, she said. So I did not come when I wanted to be seen. She looked down at her hands. I wrote a letter in my room instead. Addressed to, she hesitated, to a man I have promised to marry. She raised her chin a little. It need not concern the house. Just so. Poirot did not press. The false trail he had laid before himself, the thought that the delayed book might hide a personal drama, went out like a candle that had never been lit. He turned instead to Frobisher. Monsieur, earlier you asked for the library. Afterwards you went to the smoking room. Between those two rooms is a service door. Did you pass it? Probably, Frobisher said. What of it? Poirot's voice was very soft. You did not steady yourself by the bell cord? Frobisher's mouth opened and shut. If I did, it was to get out of the way of some maid barging along. I don't keep a diary of the walls. No, but walls keep a diary of us. Poirot's gaze moved on, unhurried. Colonel, you visited the kitchen. I did, Fanshawe said, unabashed. Wanted the mustard, the hotter one. Cook keeps it out of the draught, or the devil flies away. Merci. Poirot stood, his small figure suddenly the tallest thing in the room. We will end for this moment. At 11, as I have asked, we will gather here again. Until then, each of you will be so good as to remain within hearing of the drawing-room. I will ask that the servants keep to their rooms unless called. Mrs. Bright, you will have the kindness to send Thomas to me now, and after Thomas, Annie. They dispersed like people leaving church, relieved and a little indignant at the relief. Poirot remained, looking once more at the Tantalus. He lifted the collar marked A, held it to the light, and saw, beneath the thin line of old tarnish, a grain of something caught in the groove. He touched it to his tongue, frowned, and wiped it on his handkerchief, not to preserve it for science, but to remove from the room the insult, to order that a grain of foreign matter represented. Thomas came in and stood, his hair determined to escape its pomade, his eyes direct. Poirot said, You will tell me now, mon petit, which guest you like least. Thomas swallowed and looked at the door, as if to be sure it was shut. Mr. Frobisher, sir. And why? Because he likes to ask. The answer was unexpectedly precise. He asks for what is not yet laid, and then watches to see if you were going to forget. He asked me last night if the brandy was the right one. He said he doubted the bottle was what it said. And you told him that I don't doubt Mr. Greaves, sir. Thomas's voice thickened and cleared. I never did. Bien. Poirot nodded him away, and when Annie came, was as gentle with her as if she were bringing him a flower. Only one thing, he said. Earlier I did not ask. When you ran back after finding Mr. Greaves, from whom did you take the first instruction? Mrs. Bright, she said at once. She came to meet me because I'd been gone too long. And before she came, who was nearest the passage? Annie's brows pinched as she thought. Mrs. Melrose, sir. She was by the little table with the flowers, asking Lady Ventnor if she should pour more water in the hyacinths. She was very kind. She told me to sit. Mr. Frobisher told me to stop crying and answer clearly. Mr. Partridge sent for the doctor. Merci, Annie. He touched her sleeve lightly. You are the bravest of us. When she'd gone, he stood alone again in the library and listened to the house. It gave him its small sounds, the skitter of ash in a grate, a floorboard giving a little breath as temperature changed, the minute grind of the furnace taking new coal. He looked at the velvet-lined drawer once more, and then at the clock on the mantel. It was 10 minutes to 11. He was, he thought, almost ready to be impolite. At 5 minutes to the hour, he asked Mrs. Bright, very quietly, to oblige him with 2 simple alterations: that the decanter labelled with the collar A in the Tantalus be filled, for this evening only, from the ordinary service brandy, and that the true Armagnac, drawn from its bottle in the cellar and decanted an hour ago on his request, stand unobtrusively on the writing table in a plain glass without any collar at all. She met his eyes, understood more than he said, and inclined her head. When she had gone, he took from his pocket a corner of clean paper, and with the tip of a knife lifted from the groove of the A-collar the minute grain he had noticed earlier. It was brittle and tacky in the mouth when he had tasted it that afternoon, with that faint, resinous taint Frobisher had remarked upon and tried to make harmless with a connoisseur's shrug. Poirot did not now repeat the experiment. It had told him enough. At 11, they gathered. The library seemed to draw them in not by invitation, but by gravity. Firelight made the leather of the chairs glow. The clock stamped the minute with a discreet, satisfied click. Sir Henry stood, uncomfortable in his own room, and Lady Ventnor took a seat of courtesy beside the hearth. Mrs. Melrose chose the place where the hyacinth scent could reach her without drowning her. Partridge leaned his shoulder against the mantel as if he had leaned there often. Colonel Fanshawe planted himself where he could see all faces and be seen. Frobisher, refusing to be staged, sat and spread himself, then drew in a fraction as though the chair were smaller than he expected. Evelyn Ashcombe came last and sat slightly apart, not to be singular, but to be out of the way. Poirot remained standing only long enough to take the measure of their quiet. Then he sat, very simply, at the writing table, his hands folded. "We will not speak long," he said. "We will speak only enough that each of us may sleep a little better, or, if we must not sleep, that we will know why." No one answered. In silence of that kind, words do not steady themselves until the one who has called for them gives permission. Poirot gave it with a nod. Last night, at a few minutes past 11, Mr. Greaves went to the cellar to bring, as he had brought every March for many years, the Armagnac of the year 1893. He did not return. He was found in the passage, and there was the smell that the doctor called unnatural. There was also a small glass broken, but, observe, the fragments showed no mark of the lip. Therefore he did not drink from that glass. If he did not drink, how does he die as from poison? There are several ways, but they have this in common, that someone had anticipated him. The glass was not an improvisation, it was a piece in a plan. And there is this also. The bottle in the cellar had been handled, not as Mr. Greaves handled, but by another hand that is clumsy in neatness. The tag was turned inward. The cord was newly cut. In the groove of the collar there was a grain, only one, but of a substance that does not belong to spirits, a resin used to seal and to fake the age of a seal when one has broken it. Partridge moved a fraction. Frobisher's mouth was a flat line. The colonel's scar looked whiter. Poirot's tone did not darken. If anything, it grew more conversational, as if explaining a recipe. It is possible to remove a cork, to add what should not be added, and to make all tidy again. But Mr. Greaves was not a man whom one deceives with clumsy tidiness. He would have done, as our young Thomas showed us with such charm this morning, the small ceremony of the palm to the glass. He would have smelt first, as he always smelt. And then, whether he took a drop upon a finger, whether he only leaned to the decanter itself, we do not know, but we know the end. A poison of the sort that speaks like metal to the nose needs only that much courage from the murderer, and only that much trust from the victim. Mr. Greaves had the trust. The murderer, he had courage of a kind. He let the thought rest. In the grate, a coal settled with a little sigh. There is another thing. Someone wished to enter this room last night, when it was forbidden. At luncheon there was a voice on the telephone that asked if the library door was unlocked. The same voice called earlier and did not give the name. This voice is not from outside the house. It is from within. We have only one telephone. To call, one must have the privacy to do so, and the lack of courage to come oneself to the door. Lady Ventnor made a small sound. Poirot raised a hand very slightly. It both reassured and restrained. To that person, and to all of you, I will show two little truths. The first is simple. He rose, crossed to the tantalus, lifted the decanter with the A, and poured a finger into a glass. He set it down. This is not the Armagnac. If you doubt, smell. Monsieur Frobisher will indulge me. Frobisher, careful of indignation now that it might betray him, leaned, inhaled, and sat back, jaw setting. It is ordinary brandy. Just so, and here is the Armagnac. Poirot indicated the plain decanter on the writing table. It is without its collar, because tonight the letter A cannot help us. The true thing does not need a label to defend itself. His gaze moved, unhurried, from face to face. There is a person in this room who would have reached at once for the collar, because he relies upon names to tell him what he is drinking. There is another who would have reached at once for the glass without a collar, because she relies upon herself. It is nothing, and it is everything. No one reached. Very gently, Poirot replaced the stopper in the plain decanter. The second truth is uglier. It is that the seal from Sir Henry's drawer is no longer there. It is somewhere in this house, and has been moved this afternoon. Why? Not to open a letter, not to impress wax with the Ventnor bore, but because it is heavy for its size and warm in the hand, and because, placed on a cork, it makes a convenient little press to hold down while resin cools. There was the smallest intake of breath from one of the chairs. Poirot did not turn to it. "And now," he said, and his voice had in it the silk thread that cuts when pulled, "we will do a thing that is disagreeable. Monsieur Frobisher—" "Yes?" Frobisher's head jerked up, as if to meet a blow with his forehead. "You will be so good as to tell us why, last night, when you were refused the library, you went by the service passage rather than the long way by the hall." "I didn't." "You steadied yourself by the bell-core," Poirot said, without heat. "The dust-ring tells me that. It is a thing one does without thinking when one is impatient. You are impatient. You were impatient again at tea when the tray shifted. You caught what was in danger of being revealed without seeing your hand move. Your habit is to protect, not to display. It is a good habit in your business. It is a bad habit for innocence." "It proves nothing," Frobisher burst out. "Nothing but that I don't like trays sliding to the floor. If you dare—" "I think," Poirot said, "that last night you desired a book, and that you took the quicker way, because you are, as Thomas said with such accuracy, a man who likes to ask. I think also you have a palate that recognizes an old Armagnac from the year. It is, as you said, a boast many make. Few can support it. You supported it. But—" he lifted a finger. "A man who knows the true by its taste does not need collars. You reached your hand just now toward the tantalus before I asked you to smell from the other glass. If I had not spoken, you would have poured from the wrong one." Frobisher stared at him, blood rising into his cheeks, and then, to the surprise of most and the satisfaction of none, laughed shortly. "You are making something out of manners and guesswork. If you mean to accuse me, accuse me." Before Poirot could answer, there was a knock at the door, an urgent, contained knock, such as a good housekeeper makes when she must intrude, and would not do so for less than necessity. Mrs. Bright came in, pale not with fear, but with disapproval of what she was about to say. She held a folded napkin, soiled with ash. "Sir Henry," she said, "I have found the seal." It was pushed under the cushion of the green chair in the drawing-room. The ash. On it. "I think it has been used today." Sir Henry took the napkin and unfolded it. The little bronze lay there, the boar's back dulled where a thumb had held it, the sides smeared with a grey that would come off on the hand. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the room turned its head as one creature. Frobisher's chair had green upholstery. He had sat in it after tea. It was the picture a less scrupulous mind would have commissioned. Frobisher, impatient. Frobisher, rude. Frobisher, expert in spirits. Frobisher, linked now by an object that had no business in his orbit. Sir Henry's face did the honest thing and showed his anger. "This is intolerable. Monsieur Poirot, you have been delicate. I cannot be. I will telephone the police. He will not leave this house tonight." Frobisher half rose, then forced himself back. His hands were on the chair arms, spread as if ready to wrench them free. "I have never seen that thing before," he said, each word carved. "Non," Poirot said, but very neutrally. It might have been assent, it might have been refusal. He watched not Frobisher, but the others. Mrs. Melrose's shoulders went down, a breath she had not known she held leaving her. The Colonel's jaw set, as if to take a blow that had been aimed elsewhere and missed. Partridge's eyes, for once, let a thought pass across them before it was dismissed. Evelyn looked not at Frobisher and not at the seal, but at the small wooden box on the side table in which, earlier, the key had been concealed under a napkin. She looked at it and then away, as if she had looked out of a window on a street she did not live in. Sir Henry went to the little study and closed the door to telephone. The low murmur of his voice came and went like a draught under the sill. In the library, the silence reorganized itself around Frobisher, who sat as still as a man can sit without being made of stone. Poirot took the soiled napkin from Lady Ventnor, who had reached for it with a gesture born of long habit with household things, and refolded it so that the grey ash would not soil the table. He set it down and touched the bronze once with a fingertip. It was still warm from the earlier hand. It would be an hour before it felt like a thing alone. "When a picture is too perfect," he said, almost to the fire, "one asks who painted it and why he had so much patience." Mrs. Bright stood very straight. "Sir, I did not search that chair until now, because I had no cause to. The green chair is kept in the corner near the window. We dust under it on Saturdays. It was moved this afternoon. I saw the mark of the caster in the carpet." "You are admirable," Poirot said simply. "You will tell me, if you please, who moved it." "I could not say, sir. I was below at the time." "Then we will not guess." He looked at Frobisher and, in the face of the man's anger, offered him the smallest courtesy, one that can only be offered when one is not certain. "Monsieur, until the police come, you will do me the kindness to remain where you are. I will ask Thomas to bring you water. There is no need to make the mouth dry with rage." Frobisher did not answer. He stared at the fire as if it were a thing that could be taught a lesson. Sir Henry returned. "Inspector Barnaby is on his way," he said. "He asks that no one leave the room. He says—" He broke off, then finished dully. "He says to make a list of the valuable spirits." "We will do nothing so useful," Poirot said, with a ghost of his usual lightness. "We will, for the present, do nothing at all. The doing, it is often the enemy of the seeing." He let the minutes fall. They fell more noisily than one expects. Time is loud when one has put a foot upon it and will not let it go. At last, softly, to the only person in the room who had looked at the box, and not at the seal, he said, "Mademoiselle Evelyn." She lifted her eyes. "When did you send your letter to Mr. Greaves?" There was the tiniest beat in which her mind did the work of deciding whether to be offended. Then she said, very steadily, "I did not send him a letter, Monsieur Poirot. I sent him a note. I put it under the door of his room on Tuesday, when he was below. It said only that I would not go to the library at 11, that I would do as he advised. And the other letter, the one that came to him yesterday with the calendar card, is not mine," she said, and for the first time in the day she sounded young. "But I know who wrote it." Every face turned, even Frobisher's, as if a wire had tugged them. Poirot did not move. "Say who, mademoiselle?" She did not look at Mrs. Melrose as she spoke. She kept her eyes on the little wooden box, as if it were easier to tell the truth to an object. "Mrs. Bright," she said. "She wrote it. She told me after she posted it that she had warned Mr. Greaves, because the cellar key is not safe. She swallowed, and because she was afraid of who had used it. For a moment, no one seemed to breathe. Mrs. Bright did not look abashed. She looked like a woman whose duty had found her out in public. She drew herself a fraction taller and folded her hands on the line of her apron, as if to keep them from doing anything but be where they belonged. "I wrote to Mr. Greaves," she said, and her voice was not defiant, only exact. "I did it from the village, and I sent it to Whitstable Lane, because that is how Mr. Greaves told the post to find him when he first came here, and he never altered the instruction. I did not sign it. I am not ashamed of warning, sir, but I am ashamed of gossip, and I would not start it in my own house." Sir Henry made a small sound of protest that died at once, held fast by the dignity with which she had said, "my own house." Poirot inclined his head, not as a man who has forced an admission, but as one who receives a report from a colleague. "And the reason for your warning, madame?" "Because on Tuesday," Mrs. Bright answered, "I found that the cellar key was not where Mr. Greaves kept it on the ring. He had a place for everything, sir. You could take the ring and know where he'd put his finger to pull the key he wanted without looking. The cellar key had been moved to the end. That is the place one puts a key when it must come off quickly, and it was smudged at the bow as if finger and thumb had black on them, ash or something like. Mr. Greaves would no more touch his keys with dirty hands than he would his own dinner plate." "You told him then?" "I meant to tell him quiet," she said. "But before I could, I saw another thing. The wax from the little stick we keep in the drawer by the library fire, her ladyship uses it for notes, had been used to make a press, not on paper, but on something that took the mark and then was wiped clean. The end of the stick was dull with dust. I have kept house long enough to know when the wrong thing has been put to use. I did not want to make noise in front of the young maids. I wrote instead, and I asked him to forgive me for putting in the post what I could have said in the pantry." "And you were afraid of who had used it," Poirot reminded her, almost gently. She looked up then, not at him, but at the circle of them, with an expression that had no fear in it now, only a grave reluctance. "Yes, sir, because the person I thought of first was not the one who is rough. It was the one who is careful." The sentence altered the air. It moved heads without moving eyes. If one had to choose in that moment who, among them, was careful, a dozen small habits would rise like pins from a cushion. Partridge's neatness, Mrs. Melrose's precise way with a lemon, Lady Ventnor's ironed grief, even Evelyn's deliberate composure. It was a word that named not a man, but a species. "Describe for me," Poirot said, his tone as neutral as water, "what you saw that made you think so." "The green chair was moved, sir," she said. "Not much. Enough to set its caster off the mark by a finger. Whoever moved it put it back wrong. The most particular people are the worst for it in that way. They will put a thing back where they believe it lives, not where it does. And there was a smut of ash on the library hearth that was not from the day's fire. It had fallen after I raked. It had a round to it, as if something had been pressed, and the ash had clung and then fallen off when the thing was lifted." Poirot let out the smallest breath, like a man who has been given a word that fits a gap in a crossword he has been working at all day. "And so you sent your warning? Bravo," he said simply. Frobisher made a sound that was almost a scoff, and then turned it into a cough. "What has any of that to do with me? I am not careful. Ask anyone." "It is true," Colonel Fanshawe put in with reluctant fairness. "Frobisher blunders. He doesn't—" "Secret. Pardon, old man." Frobisher stared at him, and then at the seal under its napkin, and then at Poirot. "If your case is that I am too much of a fool to be a forger, I accept. If it is that I am a fool and a murderer, I do not." "There is no case," Poirot said mildly. "There is only a picture that pretends to be a case. The seal under your chair is a brushstroke too perfect. When Mrs. Bright tells me a chair has been moved, I think at once of a hand that planned its own discovery. You think, Partridge began, and then, with a flash of something not unlike admiration, you think someone planted the seal knowing that it would be found and cry havoc. I think, Poirot said, of motive. Who has the motive to persuade Sir Henry, instantly and without remainder, that a particular man is guilty? Not the guilty man, he prefers the fog, someone who must be protected by speed. The police are here, Sir Henry said unexpectedly, as if answering a different question. Footsteps sounded in the hall with that official cadence good servants take on when they are escorting authority. Inspector Barnaby entered with a notebook and a plain face that had seen both silliness and sin and disliked each in its turn. He heard the outlines with the patience of a man who has inherited a stage in the middle of the second act and must find his place without asking the audience to start again. He looked at the seal, at Frobisher, at the housekeeper. He sniffed the decanter when Poirot offered it, and made the sort of mouth that says nothing and is still a judgment. When Poirot spoke of the grain in the collar, he wrote it down as foreign matter, seal, and underlined it twice. When Mrs. Bright spoke of the key, moved on the ring, he wrote, key moved for speed. He turned, at the end, to Frobisher. You'll come with me, sir, he said, not unkindly. It may be we'll have you back in your seat before midnight, but I don't make promises I can't keep. Sir Henry's shoulders lowered, as if a weight had at least found a cradle. Lady Ventnor reached for a handkerchief, and discovered she was already holding it, crushed like paper between her fingers. Mrs. Melrose looked as if she might faint, and then did not. Poirot did not move. Inspector, he said, and there was in his voice nothing of rivalry, only a precise courtesy. Will you grant me 5 minutes before you take Monsieur Frobisher from this room? Barnaby considered him as one professional tradesman considers another over a counter. 5, monsieur. Not more. Poirot rose and turned to the fire, not to warm himself, but to set the company to facing him squarely. He lifted from the mantel the bronze crest of the Ventnor boar, held it a moment, and put it back so exactly that Mrs. Bright's mouth relaxed by a line. On Tuesday, he said, there were 2 notes written, one by Mrs. Bright to warn Mr. Greaves, the other, the library, 11 o'clock, was written on a sheet of paper that sat on top of a small calendar card. The pressure wrote on the card without ink. That second note is not Mrs. Bright's hand. It is a woman's, as Mademoiselle Evelyn saw at a glance, but older, more formed by habit. That note is the one that interests me. Who in this house asks for a meeting at 11 in the library? Not a servant. They would send a person, or ask in the morning. Not a man. He would knock at Sir Henry's door and be refused and go away swearing. A woman who does not wish to be seen, but who wishes a thing to be put right in private. Mrs. Melrose, who had been sitting with the grace of someone who knows her angles from a lifetime of chairs, lost half an inch of poise. Lady Ventnor's eyes closed and opened. Poirot went on, his tone so even it could have been the narration of a recipe. At 11 last night Mr. Greaves did not go to the library because of that note. He went to the cellar for the Armagnac because Sir Henry asked him at 10 minutes to, but someone meant him to go to the library first. When he did not, that person, who had prepared the bottle with the poison and the seal with the resin, could not wait. She, or he, followed the new line of necessity and hurried to the service passage. There, between the cellar and the drawing-room, Mr. Greaves paused, as he paused always, to check the scent of what he carried. And because the poison speaks in the nose as well as in the mouth, he died without swallowing. Inspector Barnaby made a note that was simply a short line, as if to hold a place for a thought that would come later. And the person? Is still in this room, Poirot said, with the mildness of a man discussing the weather. But if I give you the wrong one by a minute, Inspector, I will have failed you. Permit me one more small thing." Barnaby's mouth moved in something like a dry smile. 4 minutes, monsieur." Poirot crossed to the writing table and took up the plain decanter. He poured a very little into a glass and set it before the empty chair the green seal had once guarded. "Mademoiselle Evelyn," he said without looking at her, "will you come to me a moment?" She stood and came, composed, but with that carried tension of a string drawn and waiting. "You told Mr. Greaves you would not go to the library at 11. You obeyed yourself. You wrote to him on Tuesday because he asked you to be brave when no one could see. Bravo. You have been brave again just now. One more little courage, and I release you from questions. Tell me, whose courage failed on Tuesday? To whom did you not show the letter you did not send?" Her throat worked, and then she said, "My aunt, Lady Ventnor." Lady Ventnor did not flinch, as some women do, with a gasp and a hand to the pearls. She sat as a woman sits when told the worst has arrived, and was, after all, exactly what she expected. "I asked Greaves to see me in the library," she said quietly. "I did not want Henry told. I had need of the seal for a paper I meant to send away. It was not unlawful. It was a small protection." She turned her head, and in the movement was the ghastly grace of a person who will not cry in front of a servant. "Greaves told me I must not. He said if I wished to keep the house in order, I must ask Sir Henry's leave in the daylight. He would not come. I wrote again, and then I burned it. I did not poison any bottle. I do not know how to do that. I'm not careful, Monsieur Poirot. I'm only tired." Poirot bowed from the waist to a degree that made even Inspector Barnaby straighten by reflex. "Madame, I believe you." He turned to the inspector. "You see why the picture must be unpainted carefully. If we had allowed the planted seal to do its work, and carried away Monsieur Frobisher at once, the person I seek would have slept a little easier. She is not sleeping yet." Barnaby weighed Lady Ventnor with a practised eye, and then looked at his watch without consulting its hour. 2 minutes, monsieur." Poirot moved almost cheerfully, now that the last pieces were turning toward their sockets. He stooped to the hearth and, with a folded sheet from the writing table, gathered a little of the ash from the far right, ash that lay like a fallen grey petal where a hand pressing down would shed it. He shook the ash lightly over the napkin that held the bronze seal. The grey met the grey and showed, among the general dust, a finer, paler grit with a faint amber cast. He lifted it with the tip of a knife and touched it to the salt at his elbow. The grain took the salt's damp and clung, leaving the palest stain. "Resin and wax," he said, "and, if the doctor will confirm it when he comes, a trace that leans toward the prussic. It is not clever chemistry, it is kitchen chemistry, the kind a practical person can do, and a careful one will tidy after." He looked then, not at Mrs. Bright, who had been brave, not at Lady Ventnor, who had been unhappy, not at Frobisher, who had been framed, not at Partridge, who had been exact. He looked at Mrs. Melrose, who sat very straight and very beautiful in a way that disliked witnesses. She met his eyes, and for one terrible second allowed him to see the calculation, the way one sees a blade when the paper slips. Then the calculation went away, and she smiled as if he had paid her a compliment. "Inspector," Poirot said quietly, "you will oblige me by asking Mrs. Melrose to open the little reticule she carries for her smelling salts. If I am wrong, I will apologize. If I am right, she will show you a stick of sealing wax used down to the thumb, and a small vial that once held eau de vie and holds now something it ought not." Mrs. Melrose laughed, softly, incredulously, as one laughs at a conjurer who has somehow chosen one's own card. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," she said, with amused disdain, "you will be disappointed. I have never in my life carried smelling salts. I faint in a way that offends no one." But her hand, When she lifted it to the clasp at her wrist, did not lift. It hovered. It trembled. Barnaby did not wait for permission twice. He stepped forward with that efficient kindness English policemen have when ladies are troublesome, and, without touching her, held out his notebook, as if it were a tray upon which she might set the little bag. She did not. She sat, as if anchored. "It is not necessary," Poirot said. "We will all be very polite. Madame will open her bag. She will remove what is inside. And then, if you please, Inspector, you will take Monsieur Frobisher no further than the chair by the door, and set instead a gentleman at the other side of Madame. She will not run. She is, in her way, very brave. Only this once her carefulness has failed her." Her fingers found the clasp then, because the hand knows before the mind that an end has been reached. The room did not move. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. From the small bag came a handkerchief, a card case, a lipstick worn to the paper, and at the very bottom a little cylinder of dull red, stained at the end, and a vial the size of a thimble, cloudy at its lip. "Mrs. Melrose," Sir Henry said, in a voice with nothing in it but astonishment and fatigue. Why? She had the presence, even then, to look at him as if he had asked an impertinence. "Why?" she repeated softly. "Because order can be a cruelty when it protects the wrong things. Because I was tired of being told where I may sit, and which door is for me. Because Mr. Greaves knew everyone's truths, and made a pattern of them that suited him. Because he refused me, twice. Does it matter which reason you take?" She turned the little vial between her fingers with an almost detached curiosity. "I did not mean to kill him. I meant him to be ill, and to leave." Poirot shook his head once, very small. "Madame, there is no prussic acid that is gentle." Inspector Barnaby's hand came out, steady. "That will do." He did not touch her. He did not need to. The authority in his voice did the taking. "We'll go quietly, if you please." She rose, as composed as she had sat, and in rising brushed the side table with her sleeve so that the small wooden box slid and clicked shut, as if choosing modesty. For a heartbeat, Evelyn's eyes went to it again, and Poirot's followed, but only because he liked an object to finish what it had begun. When they had gone, when the door had shut, when the sound of official steps had turned the corner, Sir Henry sank into the chair behind the writing-table and put his hand flat upon it as if to feel something solid under his skin. Lady Ventnor's hand, to her own surprise, found Evelyn's. They did not look at one another. Mrs. Bright, who had prepared for a longer night, allowed herself the disobedience of sitting down. Poirot poured a thimble of the true Armagnac into one glass, and a thimble for himself. He did not drink at once. He looked at the little decanter, and then at the place where the seal should have lain, and then at the empty chair that had been Frobisher's. "A house," he said softly, almost with affection, "is a clock. Take out the wrong cog, and all the rest make a noise you cannot bear. Sir Henry, you will sleep. Not well, but enough. Tomorrow we will speak of the small things that must be put back in their places. Tonight we will allow the hour to pass." The hour passed, but sleep did not come to Poirot as he had promised it might. He remained in the library after Sir Henry and the others had gone, the fire fallen to a steady red, the little plain decanter giving back the flame in a patient glow. It is a failing with certain minds that once a picture has been unpainted, they cannot leave the canvas bare. They must discover what had been sketched beneath, the first true line on which the false colours were later laid. Mrs. Melrose had furnished an ending suitable for the police, and Inspector Barnaby was a man who liked the world to settle quickly into its proper boxes. Yet Poirot's little grey cells refused to be confined. Someone had arranged a scene too perfect in its haste, the planted seal, the convenient chair, the timely indignant man to carry away. One does not paint perfection in 5 minutes unless one has practiced the hand long before. At a little after 1, the house made the sound houses make when their sleepers turn over, the gentle answering creak of old wood, and then quieted again. Poirot rose, not to prowl, but to tidy. He aligned the pen in its rest, drew the velvet-lined drawer fully in, and set the collar marked A square upon its decanter, as a man might set straight a picture on a wall. He took the small wooden box from the side table and slid its lid back and forth until the catch moved with the soft exactness good joiners mean it to have. Then he put out the lamp by the door and left only the hearth and the shaded light on the writing table. It was not a trap. It was a room that told the truth, and he wished to hear it speak in its own hour. At 1:20, the key turned in the lock with that little protest of iron that good locks make when a hand that is not theirs directs them. The door opened the exact width of a careful man's shoulder. Poirot did not move. He watched the figure come in and shut the door without letting it click. The man stood a moment, breathing with the quiet of someone who is not frightened of darkness. He went not to the desk, where a thief of papers would go, but to the tantalus. He did not reach for the stopper, where a thief of spirits would go, but for the collar with the letter A, lifting it delicately between forefinger and thumb, by means of a folded handkerchief. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Partridge," Poirot said, and turned up the lamp. Partridge did not start in the way guilty men start. He paused, then finished the movement he had begun, setting the collar down with exactness. "You keep late hours, Monsieur Poirot." "Order keeps late hours," Poirot returned. "When it has been offended, it does not forgive until it has spoken. You came to hear what it would say?" "I came," Partridge said, "to see that no further mischief was done. This evening has been—" He searched for a word with the tidy irritation of a man whose papers have been shuffled. "Untidy. If the police do not analyze what they should, they will analyze what they should not. I will not have Sir Henry's household reduced to a list of forensic curiosities." "A noble impulse," Poirot said, and glanced at the folded handkerchief. "It expresses itself with the habits of a counsel handling an exhibit. The cloth first, the fingers never. One learns such cleverness in a life at the bar, n'est-ce pas?" Partridge met his eyes evenly. "One learns it sitting in a witness box under an inspector who is too fond of ink. May I advise you, Monsieur Poirot, that this conversation be suspended until daylight? I would dislike to be thought of as a burglar when my only theft is of my own sleep." "By all means," Poirot said cheerfully. "We will make of it a conversation for the morning. Only, leave the collar where it is, if you please. I am jealous for the symmetry." He took from the drawer the little pot of salt and set it again by the blotter. Partridge's gaze flickered to it and away, sharp and appraising. Then he bowed slightly and went out with the same economy with which he had come. Poirot sat a little longer, not to wait for another footstep. No one else came, but to let the room inform him of what he already knew. The next part would require daylight, because daylight makes certain people honest who are too clever to lie at night. By 9, Inspector Barnaby was back, uncompromising and in possession of facts. "We've looked at the lady's things," he said without ceremony. "The little vial smells like the devil's marzipan, oil of bitter almonds with a friend in it. Our man at the station says he'll have the chemistry by midday, but I'll put 12 shillings to a penny there's cyanide in it, enough to make a man very ill with a sip, enough to make him dead if he sniffs it in a hurry by a narrow place. Your thought about the decanter collar is not foolish. I took a scraping from the groove, as you suggested, and even my own coarse nose tells me there's mischief there. How the mischief got there is the question." "Not by accident," Poirot said. "Madame Melrose is practical, and she is careful, in the sense that she is exact in small motions. But she is theatrical. Her temper would have arranged for a swoon, for an illness that shames the man who suffers it. She is not the one who plans for a death that makes no scene. Barnaby considered him. We do not often get two hands to a single instrument. We do, Inspector, Poirot said, gently. When the instrument is a house, one hand tunes, another plays. He glanced toward the door. You will indulge me one more small caprice? A visit to Mr. Greaves's room. I have a courtesy to pay. Mrs. Bright received them on the landing as before. The little cell had not been disturbed. She had seen to that with the ferocity of a priest at an altar. Poirot went first to the table, and it repaid his courtesy. The ledger lay where he had left it, but the pencil, yesterday aligned toward the door, now pointed due north with the spine of the book. Someone has stood here, he said quietly, and meant to seem not to have stood. He opened the ledger. The page for the last week showed his remembered dots. The Armagnac with one, the old bottle of eau de vie with another, and a small marginal note, replace cord, dated the 11th. He turned back 2 pages. Between one line and the next, there was the faintest indentation, where a heavier hand had pressed a pen too earnestly. If he had been a man for rubbings, he would have taken a pencil to it. He was not. He was a man for minds. The words were already in his head. Ventnor Library. Duplicate returned. Partridge's Calm Friday. He turned to the drawer. There, beneath the folded handkerchief, lay a second pawn ticket, twinned to the first he had found yesterday, with the same number in another hand and a different date. He looked at Mrs. Bright. I did not see it yesterday, sir, she said at once. I would have told you. You did not. Someone wanted it to be seen today. He took it up and read the name, which was not Greaves, and not any other in the house. He had, perhaps, a friend with a poor watch, Poirot said aloud, as if to make of the discovery a trifle. He slid the ticket back where it had been, and shut the drawer gently, aligning the handle's screws with the grain. You see, madame, I pay you the compliment of neatness. She nodded once, gratitude passing across her face like the shadow of a bird. Back below, Poirot asked Sir Henry to call his guests to the breakfast-room, and to send word also to Inspector Barnaby that he would like a very small favour in front of witnesses. They came, bleary and decent, the edges of their distress ironed flat, where the day required it. Frobisher looked as though an apology might be prized out of the morning if he could find a lever. Colonel Fanshawe watched the door, as if it might accuse him. Lady Ventnor had already begun the day's work of making sorrow respectable. Evelyn's eyes were not red, they were older. I must tire you, Poirot said, but there is a thing we must put straight, and it is better to do it now when the coffee is hot, and the hands have not yet learned their lies for the day. Inspector, if you please. Barnaby, who liked neither displays nor puzzles before bacon, none the less obliged. He set on the sideboard the tantalus, the plain decanter, and the collar engraved A, and beside them he placed a plain sheet of paper and a small dish of salt. We are not making a nursery, he said gruffly. Monsieur has a point. Poirot's voice was almost cheerful. It is only this. Last night, Madame Melrose showed us her strength. The police have a vial and a stick to thank her for. But there was something else done in this room, a smaller thing that required no temper, only patience. Someone, after we left, attempted to remove the little offence I spoke of, the grain in the groove of the collar. He did not wish the police to find it. He came with his handkerchief and the habit of not touching. He is in this room. If he will tell us now that he came, we will save Inspector Barnaby a lecture, and possibly the inside of his pocket. Partridge's gaze went to the window, then to the collar, then to Poirot, and finally, with the smallest movement of the lips that might have been humour, to the salt. Very well, he said evenly. I came. I took nothing. I cleaned nothing. I am not so great a fool as to interfere with evidence. But I could not sleep knowing that some constable would pore about in Sir Henry's property, without knowing which bit was important. I meant to be here when he came. I was not entirely displeased to find you had anticipated me." "Merci," Poirot said, and his tone made it acknowledgment, not victory. "And since you are obliging, tell us also why, when you entered, you went first to the Tantalus and not to the desk." Partridge's mouth almost smiled. "Because, Monsieur Poirot, last night you made a show of collars and decanters, as if the alphabet could accuse a man. I prefer to view the stage from the wings." "It is well to prefer the wings," Poirot agreed. "One sees who moves the scenery." He turned to the others. "This is not to shame Monsieur Partridge. It is to say aloud that there are two kinds of carefulness, the kind that keeps one's own hands clean, and the kind that cleans too well and leaves the wrong thing shining." Lady Ventnor set down her cup with a sound like a quiet bell. "Then you think—" "I think," Poirot said mildly, "that Madame Melrose made mischief with a vial she half understood because she was angry at the man who refused her twice. I think someone else prepared the collar more neatly. Resin pressed smooth with the Ventnor seal, a grain caught in the groove, a scent that would kill by a breath and leave the glass to break without a lip upon it. It is a murder without gesture, and therefore not hers." "Whose, then?" Frobisher demanded harshly, with the appetite of the reprieved for someone else's doom. Poirot did not look at him. He looked instead at the little wooden box on the side table. He lifted it, slid the lid with that soft, exact sound, and took out the brass key. "Yesterday," he said conversationally, "I put this key under a napkin and asked you all to carry a tray. It was a foolishness, yes, but it told me who, without seeing, would catch what slid, and who would let it fall. It told me who believes that what is on a tray is to be shown to the eye, and who believes it is to be kept from it. Madame Melrose kept from the eye what she did not wish to share, and so betrayed herself. But there was another who never looked at the tray at all. He looked at the room, at the paths between tables, at the casters on the chairs. He is the one who moved the green chair and replaced it where he believed it lived." Colonel Fanshawe stirred. His gaze went to the carpet by the window. "Good God, man, are you making me out a furniture mover? I went to the window because the light was better. If I shifted a chair—" "Colonel," Poirot said kindly, "you moved the chair as a soldier. You put it back where it was useful. The person who replaced it where it ought to be, and yet put it half an inch wrong, did so because order is his vanity." Partridge was looking down at his plate, with the grave amusement of a man who has chosen his ground and will not be jostled from it. "You are creeping toward me, Monsieur Poirot. Creep faster. I am not the man to faint when his name is spoken." "Non," Poirot said, and in the soft word there was almost fondness. "You are the man to return a duplicate on Friday, and to mark its return in a ledger, because accuracy is a pleasure. You are the man who knows a lock's preference for its own key, and who would whisper to a butler that a man of law may be permitted to look at papers in comfort when Sir Henry is indisposed. You are also the man who, some months ago, discovered that the Armagnac of 1893 had been quietly denatured by a previous generation to spare the cellar from raids by visiting schoolboys, and who has since been replacing from time to time what is good with what is merely plausible, and covering your economy in resin and the seal of the boar." Sir Henry's face altered, not with anger, his sense of insult was too simple for that, but with bewilderment that reached for dignity. "Leonard?" Partridge looked up at once, and at Sir Henry he did not smile. "You know your father, Henry. He believed in display. He filled decanters for men who did not know what they drank. I suggested economies in those days, and he laughed at me. I have continued them for you because I do not believe in wasting good spirits on bad throats." "Economy?" Frobisher exploded. "You poisoned a man for economy?" "I did not poison anyone," Partridge said. and the evenness of his voice had the edge of ice on shallow water. "I am not a fool, and I am not a dramatist. I took no vial from a woman's bag, and I planted no seal under a chair. I returned a key on Friday, I checked a ledger, and I went last night to be sure you too." He indicated Poirot and Barnaby with the courtesy that hides contempt. "Did not make an ass of yourselves with the wrong inference." Inspector Barnaby, who had been writing as if carving on wood, shut his notebook. "I don't warm to being instructed on my job, Mr. Partridge. But I'll tell you what, we'll have a look in your room for a stick of resin, and we'll have a look in your pockets for a little bit of cord cut on the 11th. If we find nothing, you may instruct me all you like." "You may look," Partridge said. "You will find a man's things, and not a chemist's. I repeat, I have not killed. If you wish the man who did, look to motive that runs deeper than petulance and habit." Evelyn had been very still, her hands on the table like two obedient birds. Now she lifted one and set it gently on the edge of the little wooden box. "Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, "you have been kind to my aunt and just to the others. Will you be kind to me? If Mr. Greaves had a secret that was not about bottles or seals, would you tell it to me first?" Poirot looked at her, and whatever had been going on in his mind shifted as a picture shifts when one steps a pace to the side. He had not forgotten the pawn tickets, nor the school Virgil, nor the neat spectacles, nor the line in the ledger that said Whitstable Lane. He had not forgotten the way Mr. Greaves had kept his Sunday suit brushed, as if to wear it soon. There are economies of the heart more careful than any barrister's. "I will tell it to you," he said, "when I am sure I may without making harm." He replaced the key in the box and shut it with that small, exact click. "For the present, mademoiselle, I ask one little patience. Inspector, I beg you do a thing that is dull. Take the collar A and the little grain I showed you yesterday, and have them examined by your man. It is enough that he will tell us if the cyanide lives there. If it does, we know our death was in the air between glass and mouth. If it does not, then someone persuaded Mr. Greaves to put his finger where it would not come back alive." Barnaby grunted. "We'll have it in 2 hours." "During which," Poirot said pleasantly, "we will not quarrel, and we will not accuse. We will let the house tell us one more thing." He looked toward the passage. "Mrs. Bright, oblige me once more. Put the green chair back, please, where it truly lives, not where it has lately been. And then we will all go about for an hour, as if this were any other morning. If anyone in passing cannot resist setting the chair to his memory of right—" He spread his hands. "We will forgive him. It is a small sin." They broke then, because breakfast can only be stretched so far even by crime. People returned their cups to saucers with the little sound of surrender that cups make when they are empty. Partridge went away with Inspector Barnaby's constable at his elbow, and a face that announced no one could be more bored. Frobisher paused by the tray, and did not touch the collar. Colonel Fanshawe stood in the doorway, and tried to find something to do with his hands. Lady Ventnor and Evelyn went together, and if their shoulders leaned a fraction, no one pretended to see. Poirot remained, a small figure among large chairs, listening to the life of the house resume its polite noises. He waited long enough for footsteps to go, and then long enough for one set to come back. The footfall hesitated by the drawing-room threshold, crossed it, and paused again by the window. There was the tiniest scrape of a caster, the smallest exhale of carpet fibres remembering weight. Poirot smiled, very slightly, as one who hears the clock strike the hour he has been expecting. He did not look up. He already knew whose hand, careful beyond kindness, could not bear to let a chair be wrong. The scrape was the smallest thing, a caster protesting by a thread, and it was enough. Poirot did not look up. He heard the chair settle and be nudged half a thumb to the left, then a delicate adjustment back, as if the hand could not bear to leave it imperfectly right. He waited until the step withdrew, and the passage took back its quiet, and only then rose and touched the chair's leg with his finger to feel, in the nap of the carpet, the twin of the little hollow Mrs. Bright had shown him. It had been persuaded home twice now, in two different memories. He smiled, a mere softening of the mouth, and let the room go as it wished to sit. By 10, the house was again assembled by necessity. Inspector Barnaby came with the chemistry, his manner as practical as his boots. "We've had the collar in a wash," he said. "Cyanide in the groove, as sure as eggs. Enough to quiet a cat on a saucer. None in the glass you found on the floor. Your butler died by sniffing where he trusted the label." Sir Henry's face closed like a gentle door. Then it was not Mrs. Melrose's vial. Barnaby gave the careful shrug of a man who does not dispose of a charge until he has stamped the form twice. It was mischief enough, but no, not the thing that finished him. Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Inspector. That is the line we required. We will not be unjust to a wrong sin." "Good." Barnaby put away his notebook with a short press of palm and paper. "Now I'll trouble you for the rest, monsieur. You've a look as if you've kept some for breakfast." "You are amiable," Poirot returned. "It will be a breakfast for 2 sittings." He turned to the others. "We will not gather again as last night until evening. Until then, go as you must, only within the house. There is one courtesy I ask, that no one take it upon himself to make the little tidinesses. They will tell me what I need if they are left." They dispersed with that curious blend of relief and resentment that crime makes respectable. Frobisher paused by Poirot as if to speak, and could not find the shape of an apology. He went out angry with his own tongue. Colonel Fanshawe stopped at the drawing-room threshold, saw the green chair exactly where Mrs. Bright had put it an hour before, and folded his hands behind him like a man on parade to keep them from doing a kindness. Lady Ventnor, almost imperceptibly, leaned toward Evelyn, and Evelyn leaned back, as if to accept without making of it a ceremony. Partridge neither hurried nor delayed. He went by the library with a glance that was not a glance. Poirot gave the house time to be itself. He took that time to pay his small courtesy upstairs, to the room that had been Edwin Greaves's. Alone, he stood where Mrs. Bright had stood the day before and took up the school Virgil, the edges worn by the patient thumb. Between a page of Latin hexameters and an old tram ticket, there lay a small folded paper sealed with a smear of common wax, the sort kept by the library for notes. He did not break it. He turned it in his hand, as one weighs a word before speaking it aloud, and saw, impressed faintly in the wax by a coin's rim, the ghost of the Boer passant. He smiled again, this time with something like tenderness. A man who had never pretended liked the form of propriety, even for his private papers. He put the little seal back between the pages and returned the book to its place, the spine straight to the grain of the wood. On his way down, he met Annie coming up with a basket of linen. She stopped, flushed, and bobbed, because one does, whether or not a bow is required. "It will be the clean day, sir," she blurted, and looked distressed, as if clean days should not walk in the house with death in it. He softened his voice. "The clean day is loyal. It comes whether we deserve it or not. Tell me, petite, Mr. Greaves, he wore sometimes a little watch?" "Only on Sundays." She brightened in the way young people do when they recall a detail that makes them part of what matters. "Silver, with a dent. He said it kept better time for a dent." "Ah," he let her go. "The dentist. The pawn tickets twin to one number, 2 hands, different dates. A watch that went out and came home, out and home, like a pensioner from a park bench. A debt paid as often as it could be, and never quite paid for good." He filed the domestic poetry of it in his head. The sentiment was not the point, but it was a guide. In the library, he found Partridge without surprise. The barrister stood by the window, the green chair at his shoulder. He had set his hand on the back, not to move it, but as if to read something in the cloth. "You set it straight," Poirot said mildly. Partridge's hand did not alter, but his mouth did. Mrs. Bright had set it straight, he answered. Someone else had set it straight again, in a different length. I put it back where the caster's scar says it has lived. It is a perversion to pretend that a piece of furniture lives where it is told. The law, Poirot murmured, is often obliged to pretend a man lives where he is told. He came nearer and looked, not at the chair, but at Partridge's left hand. The ring finger's top joint had the flattened look of an old break that had been set, if not poorly, then with too much stoicism. He remembered, as one recalls a picture hung in a friend's house for years, the palm print on the cage door in the cellar. 3 fingers strongly marked, the 4th blurred. He did not look toward the cellar. He said only, "You knew Mr. Greaves would scent the bottle." "I knew he would be Mr. Greaves." Partridge did not hide the precision of the thought. "Men do what they have done every day. That is why we make rules. They are the rails for habit to run on. And when one wishes a derailing, one sabotages the rails. You see, you are eloquent even in murder." Partridge's eyes came to him then cleanly, with no dodging. "I have not murdered. That is where your eloquence misleads you, Monsieur Poirot. I had cause to dislike the man, and cause to respect him, and cause to fear his interference. But if I had wished him dead, I should not have done it in a way that spoilt a cellar I have kept like a library." "Your cellar?" Poirot's tone stayed amiable. There was the smallest emphasis on the possessive. Partridge did not answer the emphasis. He removed his hand from the chair's back with a care that was habitual, not guilty. "If your object is to drive me to a falsehood by irritation, you must be more irritating." "Non," said Poirot, and the little word carried neither irritation nor surrender. "My object is to let the chair tell me who cannot leave it wrong. Merci, monsieur. It has told me." He went past him to the writing table, and with the blunt end of a pencil marked, in his mind only, the clean patch in the velvet where the seal had lain, and the grain of salt, now washed thin and grey by Barnaby's experiments. The pattern had the clarity of a children's game. A seal used to press, a resin used to fake, a grain caught and too small for its own ambition. It was not melodrama, it was habit grown bold. Inspector Barnaby put his head in and said, with a bluntness that had nearly become politeness, "We've had a look in Mr. Partridge's room. If he keeps arsenals, he keeps them in his mind. Not a scrap. I'll have the men go through the guest rooms after lunch. Are you set on keeping them here through tea again?" Poirot spread his hands. "Inspector, if I let them go now, one of them will tidy so well he will make our work too easy in the wrong direction. One more day. Tonight the gathering. After that, if I am wrong, you shall say to me, 'Monsieur, you have been a fool,' and I will reply, 'Inspector, you state a fact that has been observed before.'" Barnaby snorted, which for him passed for affection, and withdrew. Poirot asked then for Evelyn. She came without reluctance. Her composure was not obstinacy. It was a way of not spilling. He did not seat her by the fire. He took her to the little sitting room beyond the library, where the portraits were less official, and the windows looked on, the kitchen garden. He placed the school Virgil on the table between them, and tapped the page without opening it. "In this," he said, "is a note that was meant for you, not by name, by the sort of address a man like Mr. Greaves knows how to make, by which hand will know what is meant to be read." She looked at the book, and the eyes that had been old for days were, for a moment, only eyes. A girl's, seeing a present unopened. "What does it say?" "I have not looked. It is a courtesy. If, when you read it, there is anything that helps me to put the house in order, you will tell me. If there is not, you will put it in your pocket, and I will forget it exists." She broke the wax and read standing, as if letters stand better when one does. He watched her face not as a fortune-teller watches a client, but as a gardener watches weather. for direction, for force, for change at the edge. There was no melodrama. There was a breath caught at a single word, a narrowing of the mouth when a particular sentence had to be fitted into sense, and at the last there was the smallest nod. She refolded the paper and put it away, as one puts away a handkerchief that is one's own. "Thank you," she said. "It concerns no one, but it changes the number of people who are alone." "That is always a good arithmetic," Poirot said. "And does it explain why Mr. Greaves had a watch with a dent that kept better time?" Her mouth almost smiled. "It explains the dent. Bon, then I will make only the logical deduction. When a man is about to change rooms in life, he lays out his Sunday suit. He did so. It was not for church. It was for an appointment with a person who now will not need him to come in that suit. That person is not you." "No," she said, and the serenity of the answer was not brave or resigned. It was simply exact. "But he knew I would be looked after." Poirot rose and bowed, because courtesy had furnished him with nothing more useful. When she had gone, he allowed himself the indulgence of one small conjecture, that the pawn tickets which had crossed hands belonged to a woman in Whitstable Lane who had a story with Greaves that was not sordid, not his daughter perhaps, but the widow of a friend, or a sister too proud to be helped except by a fiction. He put the conjecture away. Sentiment had its hour. This was the hour of rails and sabotage. At 4, Barnaby brought him the constable's little list. Mrs. Melrose had been sent on with a matron to the station. Her vial had obliged in analysis. Her stick of wax had on its stump a smear of grey like that on the Boer seal. Sir Henry had telegraphed his solicitor, Harbottle, Sharp and Company, to attend tomorrow. Partridge had neither objected nor hastened to volunteer. Thomas, questioned again, had nothing new but honesty. Annie had cleaned the silver as if it were a way of saying a prayer. The house settled into that unnatural order that comes after an arrest. People spoke. Lower. Doors closed without the casual bang of day. Steps learned to avoid the one board that complains. Poirot asked for Sir Henry then, and stood with him at the library window as the light loosened from the lawn and went up into the trees. "You will forgive a question without politeness," he said. "If Mr. Partridge were to tell you he has made economies on your behalf that were not quite candid, would you forgive him?" Sir Henry's jaw moved with the deliberation of a man who does not allow himself to be quick. "If he has saved me £1 by falsehood," he said at last, "I will pay him the £1 and remove my trust. If he has saved me 10 by risking a human life, I will ask the law to see to him. I can tell the difference, Monsieur Poirot." "Then we are allies," Poirot said. "Tonight, when we gather, you will do nothing but sit and be Sir Henry. Someone wishes your temper to choose a culprit for them. You will not oblige." Sir Henry looked at him with that respect English gentlemen have for other men, who also keep their shoes well. "I will do as you ask." The hour came down like frost. They took their places in the library without being told where to sit. The house had taught them. The green chair was in its place, and if someone's hand ached not to nudge it, that too was part of the order. Poirot stood by the writing table and did not raise his voice. There is a kind of quiet in which truth travels farther. "Last night," he said, "I told you there were 2 hands to this business. One has been taken away by the police. She will answer for her part. The other stayed among us and could not stop mending what he had disturbed. He set a chair straight to his idea of right. He came back in the night with a handkerchief to guard his fingers from ink that was not there. He cannot pass a door without trying the latch. He is the kind of careful that is a vanity, a vice that looks like a virtue." Partridge did not move. He did not look defiant or afraid. He looked, for once, interested. "Before I speak his name," Poirot went on gently, "I will say 2 things, so that no one need interrupt with anger. First, Mr. Greaves did not die because of a quarrel over a woman, or a slight over a book. He died because order was offended and would not consent to be bypassed. Second, the person I will name did not put poison in a glass with a shaking hand. He pressed resin with a seal as neat as a signature and laid a scent as subtle as a habit. He thought to kill without a scene, and he succeeded, but he could not refrain from arranging the chairs after. He spread his hands, a small man making a modest space, bigger with precision. Inspector, after I pronounce it, you will do your duty. Before I pronounce it, you will permit me one question more to the person I mean. He will answer because he cannot leave a thing unfinished. Partridge lifted his head a fraction. The movement was a nod without consent. Monsieur, Poirot said, and the quiet was so complete that the tick of the clock seemed impropriety. In Mr. Greaves's ledger, on Friday, there is the line you wrote. Ventnor, Library. Duplicate returned. Will you tell us, in your own pleasure of exactness, where the duplicate had been? Partridge's eyes shone, not with triumph, not with fear, but with the resignation of a man who has been invited to explain and cannot deny himself the comfort. In my pocket, he said, from Tuesday to Friday. He smiled, a narrow thing, like a paper cut, because on Tuesday night, Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Greaves refused to open the library for a lady, and I do not like the library to be refused to anyone who has the right to read. Partridge's admission fell into the room with scarcely a ripple. It sank at once to the bottom where the motives lie. Poirot inclined his head, accepting the neatness of the phrasing, the way one accepts a pawn advanced with purpose. In your pocket, he repeated, as if the words themselves had a weight. From Tuesday to Friday. Tuesday when a lady asked and was refused. Friday when you returned it and wrote yourself exact upon Mr. Greaves's page. Between, there is the emptiness where a man like Mr. Greaves hears the step he does not like behind him on the stairs. Partridge's mouth thinned. He would not have liked my step on any stair where he believed his own soul sufficient. You make of it drama. It was policy. I do not approve the serfdom of libraries. You do not approve, Poirot agreed gently, that the order which is not yours should stand. It is a vanity, monsieur. It has the appearance of a virtue and the taste of a poison. You could not endure that Mr. Greaves, who made the maps and marked the keys, should make also the permissions. I will not engage, Partridge said, and the politeness cut. If you mean to accuse me, do so. I mean to describe you, Poirot returned. The accusation, she arrives when the description leaves no room. He did not look at Sir Henry. He did not require the sanction. He looked at his own small hands as he spoke, as if reminding himself that they had never forced a lock or struck a blow. There are 2 lines drawn in this house. One is simple. Madame Melrose, angry, foolish, practical enough to make mischief with a vial and a stick of wax. She intended illness, she achieved nothing, and she then sought to save herself with a scene. Inspector Barnaby has taken her hand. She will answer for it. The other line is older and finer. It begins not with temper, but with tidy economies. Long ago, the Armagnac of 1893 was denatured by a gentleman who liked display. Since then, there has been a habit, how shall we name it, of replacing what is true with what will pass. Not theft. No, we will not glamorize it. A sleight of household, the collar polished, the tag turned, the bottle that is not the bottle pushed into line and made to bow with. The rest. And because a man who loves order must flatter his conscience, a little resin and a seal to persuade himself that it is not deceit, but tidying. Frobisher let out a breath through his teeth. It might have been a curse or a prayer. Sir Henry said nothing. Partridge looked as if a very precise piece of music were being played a half-tone sharp. You speak of resin, as if it were a creed, he said at last. It is a creed, Poirot said, to the man who believes that impressions are as good as facts. That man pressed the resin with the bore not once, but often. He enjoys the neatness of it. Yesterday he pressed again, but this time not to cover a little economy. He pressed so that a grain lodged in the groove of the collar and stayed to betray him when Mr. Greaves died by the habit of his nose. He pressed because he knew Mr. Greaves's habit, as we all now know it, as Thomas so prettily showed us with the palm that warms the glass. Barnaby had his pencil poised. Now he put it down with a dry click. "You'll come to your proof, monsieur." "I come to it walking, Inspector," Poirot said, unoffended. "To poison a man with the scent of his own care, one must know a little chemistry and a great deal of him. One must know that he will go to the cellar at 5 minutes after 11, because Sir Henry asked for the Armagnac at 10 to. One must know that he will pause in the narrow, as he always pauses, to take the first breath. One must know that he will not drink at once, that he will not pour for himself in the passage like a footman. Who knows all this? Not a guest of a month's acquaintance. A house friend, a house lawyer, a man who calls the velvet in the drawer by its proper name." Partridge's fingers were very still upon the arm of the chair. "You wrap me," he said, "in adjectives." "I dress you," Poirot returned. "Then I show the seams." He lifted his hand and ticked them off, one by one, not grand, not theatrical, merely precise. "Tuesday, you take the duplicate because you do not like the butler's refusal. That night or the next, the library seal is where a careful hand may borrow it to press resin where resin has no right. Wednesday or Thursday, the little collar is dressed for murder, a grain lodges. Friday, you return the key and write in a ledger because neatness is your pleasure. Saturday, you hear that Sir Henry's March tradition will be kept. You prepare the tag, the cord, the bottle, thinking to send Mr. Greaves by the nose to his death without a scene. Last night, the thing is done. Today at luncheon, with your mind on the tidying you cannot resist, you telephone like a housemaid. Is the library door unlocked? Because you cannot bear to leave a room that holds a trace of your hand. In the night, you come with a folded handkerchief to lift the collar and erase the grain before a constable's thumb can make you vulgar. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Partridge," said I, and you, who never blush, walked backward with dignity. It was quiet afterwards. A log shifted in the grate, as if it had been standing too upright, and had remembered that wood prefers to recline. Partridge had not moved his eyes from Poirot's face. Now he let them go to the tantalus, to the collar that sat upon the cut glass like a crown on a skull. "You saw me," he said. "You have saved the chemistry a step." "I saved you nothing," Poirot said softly. "I saved the order you offended." Barnaby stood. His duty moved in him the way a tide moves, unhurried and without suspense. "Mr. Partridge, I'll ask you to come with me." "On what charge?" Partridge inquired almost conversationally. "On the charge," Barnaby said, "that you prepared a decanter collar with a substance you knew would kill by inhalation, intending the death of the man who would smell it. We'll see what the Crown says of the category. It's murder to me." Partridge's gaze slid to Sir Henry, not pleading, not defiant, merely tidy, closing one book before another opened. "Henry," he said, "I have managed your papers for 15 years. I prevented your father from ruining you with generosity. I prevented you from ruining yourself with neglect. I did not intend violence. I intended a correction." "Leonard," Sir Henry answered, and the grief in his voice was the grief of a decent man who finds that another decent man is not what he thought, the grief that cannot express itself in drama and so becomes steadiness. "You killed my butler." Partridge smiled then, tiredly, and with a barrister's awareness of theatre. "I killed your map-maker," he said. "It is worse." Barnaby's constable came a step and then another. Partridge rose without hurry. His left hand, when he put it upon the chair to steady himself, showed the flattened joint Poirot had marked. It was the hand that had left its blurred fourth finger on the cellar cage. Poirot saw Lady Ventnor's eyes follow it, and know. He saw Evelyn's hand tighten upon the little wooden box, as if it were a thing that could be made to hold people safe by being shut. He saw Frobisher look down and feel, perhaps for the first time in his loud life, the weight of having been foolish and nearly the instrument of another man's escape. "Permit me," Partridge said quite gravely to Inspector Barnaby, "to take my hat." He did not look at Poirot as he passed, and Poirot did not speak. There is a courtesy due to a man who has finished his role and knows it. When the door had closed and the steps gone down the hall in measured pairs, Sir Henry sat as if he had been arranged there by a stagehand who understood proportions. "What happens now?" he asked into the room, and each of them heard a different question. "Now," Poirot said, "we allow the chemistry to do its pedestrian work, and the law to do its heavy. We, in the house, will put back the small things. Madame Bright will return the seal to the drawer and put a new stick of wax by the fire. Thomas will shake the napkins in the garden. Annie will take the clean day to the end. Mademoiselle Evelyn," he turned to her, "will write 2 letters, one she must and one she wishes. Lady Ventnor will make a list of the guests she can bear to see, and the guests she can afford to lose. Sir Henry, he will walk once around the lawn and come back by the service door and say to the house there will be no more March traditions until next year." "You speak as if it were a story that can be finished by a list," Lady Ventnor said, and her voice was not unkind. "It is not a story," Poirot answered. "It is a room. One does not finish rooms, one keeps them." "You knew about the hand," Evelyn said quietly. "In the cellar." "Yes," Poirot said. "It was the little print of a habit, 3 fingers strong, the 4th blurred. It is a thing a man lives with without ever seeing. Mr. Partridge is a man who heals around his injuries and uses them as rulers." Frobisher cleared his throat. He had a look of a man who has walked under a falling scaffold and discovered after the dust that he is unhurt. "I will apologize," he said stiffly, because stiffness was his best coat. "To the house, to Mrs. Bright, to the fellow." He could not force Partridge's name. "You will breakfast," Poirot interrupted gently. "After breakfast you will go to the cellar with Inspector Barnaby, and you will tell him, with that palate you are so proud of, which bottles are true and which are polite. It will be a penance suited to your talents." Frobisher's mouth twitched, and for the first time since the night began, he looked more like a man than a collection of mannerisms. "I will do it," he said. Colonel Fanshawe looked down at his hands, found nothing to do with them, and then, with a simplicity that made him suddenly younger, said, "Greaves once brought me a blanket when I would not ask for one. We will see to his people, Henry." Sir Henry nodded. "Yes," he said, "yes." Poirot went to the writing table and, without fuss, set the plain decanter back into the tantalus and removed the collar with the A. He held the collar a moment and then, very carefully, laid it on the blotter. "This," he said softly, "we will not use again until it has forgotten what it has been asked to do." He turned to Evelyn then, and because he did not wish to carry his knowledge like a secret that burned, he said, in a voice only she and the fire could hear, "Mademoiselle, in the school Virgil is a note Mr. Greaves left, sealed as if for a parish christening. It is for you. It is not the confession of a crime, and it will not help the police. It is a little map he made for a life he meant to set straight. You will put it where it cannot be tidied by anyone but yourself." She met his eyes, and there was, for the first time, warmth in the steadiness. "I have it," she said. "It helps." "Eh bien," Poirot murmured. Then he did not die entirely on the way to the cellar. Inspector Barnaby came back once to say that the station wished to know whether Sir Henry would prefer to have the formalities tomorrow before noon. "We'll keep the house quiet," he added, which was as much comfort as a policeman gives. He glanced at the collar on the blotter and made a small face. "Ugly trick, that. smelling the thing. Ugly, Poirot agreed. It is the vanity of the careful, to believe that the breath is not part of the body, that one may kill without the blood or the glass. Barnaby grunted. We'll make a case of it that even a jury with indigestion can follow. You'll be in town by Thursday? If Sir Henry releases me, Poirot said, with a little bow that included the house. Sir Henry rose at that, and his rise was a return to himself. Monsieur Poirot, he said, the house releases you when you are content, not before. Then, Poirot replied, tomorrow morning. They dispersed, not as suspects, but as people who live in a place that has been returned to them, if not as it was, at least in a way they recognize. Mrs. Bright came in with a little tray and took away the glass that had held the Armagnac, and if her mouth trembled, it was only because she had allowed herself to be tired. Annie passed the door with a basket and did not look in because she had been told not to see. Obedience was, for the moment, a mercy. Frobisher went down with Inspector Barnaby to sniff his penance. Colonel Fanshawe went out to the gravel and told a gardener to take the frost cloth off the camellias because there would be no frost tonight. Lady Ventnor went to her room and shut the door, and Evelyn did not follow her. She went instead to the little sitting room and opened a book and folded into it the life that would now have to be lived. Poirot, left with Sir Henry and the fire, did a thing he rarely allowed himself. He sat in the green chair. He sat very lightly, as one sits in a chapel pew, not one's own, and then he stood at once and set it back with 2 fingers to the exact place Mrs. Bright had decided for it. Voilà, he said softly. Order, but not the vanity of it. We must be precise, and yet not tyrants. Sir Henry gave a half smile. If I can manage that in governance, I will be more than my father. You will be yourself, Poirot said. It is the most difficult of offices. The evening came down. They dined in a way that did not pretend to be celebration, but insisted on being a meal. After, in the drawing-room, no one mentioned the seal or the collar or the boar, which lay dull as if it were ashamed. Poirot excused himself early, not to sleep, but to arrange his valise, which he did as he did everything, with care that did not require witnesses. On the writing table, he left a note for Inspector Barnaby with 2 small additions, that the trolley's grey smear would, if tested, match the resin from the collar, and that the blurred finger on the cellar cage was left hand 4th, old injury. Monsieur Partridge's hand shows this, he wrote, without malice. At the door he paused and looked back at the room that had tried all day to tell the truth the way a house tells it, by where chairs insist on living, by what collars remember, by how keys return to their rings. He put out the lamp and left the fire to settle into the kind of red that keeps faith with those who sleep. In the corridor, the cold had come up from the stone and made a proper end to the day. Poirot drew his hand along the bell cord in passing and felt the faint dust ring give up its last definition under his fingertip. It pleased him, as the last notation on a well-ordered score does, to know that when morning came the maid would dust it away, innocent, and the house would be itself again, minus one careful man, and one that was too proud to be refused. The map-maker had fallen, but the map remained. Tomorrow he would hand it back to those who must walk it. Morning came with that pale, unsentimental light that makes a house look honestly itself. No richer, no poorer. Every scratch on the banister the age it truly is. Poirot rose early and found the corridors empty of voices and full of those useful footsteps that make a day begin. The coal scuttle wheeled and steadied, the water jug placed without clink, the brush whistling once under a maid's breath before she remembered herself, and swallowed the tune. He went down to the library and found the green chair where Mrs. Bright had left it. The bell cord, dusted at last, hung innocent. He approved the dusting as one approves good manners, not noticed when done, offensive when absent. Inspector Barnaby arrived before 9, with a face that had decided upon dullness and would not be tempted by drama. "Partridge has made a statement," he said, taking the proffered cup and blowing on it once like a man confirming that tea behaves according to physics. "As neat as his handwriting. He says he prepared the collar himself, says he's done similar things to collars before to preserve appearances. That's the phrase. Says he believed the scent would make the fellow faint and order would be restored. When I asked him what he meant by order, he gave me a little sermon about correct relations between staff and family. It'll read very pretty in front of a jury." "He did not think himself murderous," Poirot said, not as excuse but as description. "He thought himself tidy," Barnaby returned. "Our chemist says the amount on that groove would knock a horse on its back if a horse had the sense to warm a glass. Your butler's habit did the rest. Anyhow, we're charged. He won't run. He's the sort that keeps an appointment even with the doc," Sir Henry was told. He did not inquire whether there would be scandal. He did not ask about the papers. He stood in the library and looked at the Tantalus a long moment, then reached down and took out the plain decanter and set it in the tray with the goblets, as if returning them to an honest life. "Mrs. Bright," he said when she came at his bell, "we will drink the Armagnac tonight and finish the bottle. It is not a tradition any longer. It is a courtesy to Mr. Greaves." She inclined her head. She would see that the bottle did not speak twice. Frobisher, red with a self-consciousness that sat ill on him, and therefore did him good, came with Inspector Barnaby to the cellar and acquitted himself with a seriousness that surprised everyone except Thomas, who had seen men be useful when it was required. "This is sound," Frobisher said of one bottle, "and this says it is what it is." Of another, "This is a story." They made a little list. The list would not hang a man. It would make a ledger right. Colonel Fanshawe found a quiet hat and went to speak to the gardener, and then, by a series of conversations that had nothing to do with conversation, to the carpenter, and thence, by way of those channels military men know how to find, to a fund that would present itself as an accident in a week or two at the door of the woman in Whitstable Lane, whose address had been written on the envelope to Mr. Greaves. He did not tell anyone he had done it. When asked why he was in his boots before 10, he said the frost would lift and then the tennis court would need rolling. A soldier's lies are always practical. Lady Ventnor did what ladies do when order has been hurt and men are occupied with the large verbs of law. She ordered the smaller verbs. Rooms were put in their places, trays went up and came down, a letter was sent to the vicar with the tone that makes men of the cloth put on their better cassocks. Linen was looked over and not found wanting. She did not attempt comfort. She repaired it. When a neighbour called in the afternoon with a face arranged for inquiry, Lady Ventnor let her see the arrangement and not the room. That is the most a house can ask of its mistress. Evelyn came to Poirot after luncheon. She did not bring the school Virgil. She did not need to. The book had done its work. "I went to the kitchen garden," she said simply, "and read the note there because Mr. Greaves liked the garden when no one else was about. He wrote that he had been sending a little money, off and on for years, to a Mrs. Reeve, Sarah Reeve, at Whitstable Lane, because her husband, a porter he had known as a boy, had died, and there were 2 children that would not be a burden if someone only would take off the corner of it. He wrote that he meant to leave service at Michaelmas and take rooms with them and be a help without being a tyrant. He wrote that if anything happened sooner, he was a careful man. Mrs. Bright had the passbook, and I was to see it put where a woman can reach it without asking a man. He put £10 more in, the pantry tin last week." She looked at her hands. "He said, too, that if I changed my mind about my engagement—" She left the sentence not quite finished, as one leaves a door ajar when there is a sleeping child. Poirot nodded. "He was in love with order," he said softly. "He wished you to have the order of your own life." "I think," she said, and her mouth knew what it was saying now. "That I shall not marry Mr. Garston. He is a kind man, but he wishes a decoration and not a companion. He was relieved when I said last night I would write to him. It is better to be what one is than to be praised for what one is not." "Bon," Poirot said. "And Mrs. Reeve?" "Mrs. Bright and I will go tomorrow. My aunt has agreed. It is not perfect. It will be human." He did not ask to see the note. He did not need the sentences. He had the shape. He walked with her as far as the service door, and they stood a moment and looked at the strip of kitchen garden, the strings drawn in neat squares across March earth, neatness with patience in it rather than vanity. "It is a good geometry," he said, "for vegetables and for lives." Inspector Barnaby took his leave in the late afternoon. He had the look men have when they have been useful in an exact way, a tiredness without resentment. "You'll come to the inquest if the coroner makes a fuss about foreign methods?" he asked, almost as a joke and almost as a hedge. "If the coroner wishes to quarrel with the alphabet," Poirot said, "I will bring him the collar marked A." Barnaby allowed himself a grunt that admitted a smile had existed and had been correctly repressed. "I'll send you the line when we've put the charge," he said. "You'll have gone to town and tucked yourself up at the Savoy." "I will tuck myself up where the sheets are ironed," Poirot returned, "and be grateful to those who iron." They shook hands as men do who have not become friends, but have passed the distrust that keeps men from it. Supper was an ordinary meal, lifted a little by an absence. There was no place laid for Mr. Partridge. No one said his name. The room did not require it. After, Sir Henry stood by the chimney-piece and looked into the fire as if it were an honest interlocutor. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, not turning, "I have been thinking of the word you used, vanity. It is an odd thing to be careful for the sake of oneself rather than the thing itself." "When it is for the thing," Poirot said gently, "one does not mind being seen to be clumsy while one learns. When it is for oneself, one cannot bear the chair out of place, and one cannot bear the blame. Mr. Partridge could not bear it, and he made of order a god. Gods are poor servants." Sir Henry turned then, and the lines of fatigue on his face were decent lines. "You will think me a silly man, but I would like, if it is proper, to have Mr. Greaves's funeral from the front door, and not from the yard. It was his house, too." "It will teach the village the meaning of the word proper," Poirot said, and there was warmth in the dryness. "And a certain retired barrister will not be there to argue the point." Before bed, he made the small rounds he always makes in a house that has trusted him. He stood at the window a moment, and saw the lawn lie plain. He put his finger under the lip of the collar, and felt nothing there but metal and memory. He touched the green chair's back, as one pats a dog one is leaving. He did a foolishness, too. He checked the bell cord twice to be sure it had no more to tell. It did not. He allowed himself the pleasure of unnecessary precision. He set his travelling clock 2 minutes fast, and then set it back again. Even vanity, in so small a measure, has its charm when confessed at once and corrected. He slept. In the morning, the house had that look houses have after a storm of visitors. Dishes laid to dry with their faces to the wall, flowers recut and placed without ceremony where they can drink. Quiet that is not emptiness, but a resting. Mrs. Bright brought him chocolate and a plate with toast, and beside it a small paper parcel neatly wrapped. "From Mr. Greaves's drawer, sir," she said. "He kept it for the day he thought he'd go. The name on it is not mine, and it is not yours. It is nobody's. I think he meant it for the person who would take the charge from him when it came time. I would be obliged if you'd do with it what seems best." Poirot opened it after she had gone. It held the pawn tickets, both of them, and a small key with a scrap of string tied in the tidy knot Mr. Greaves used, and a line in that exact hand. "For the friend of the house. The suit is brushed." He put the tickets back into their paper. Some things men put away are not meant to be redeemed. They are meant to be remembered. He gave the key to Mrs. Bright and asked her, as if asking a favour to himself, to see that the pantry tin with the £10 in it found its way to Whitstable Lane. She said only, "Yes, sir," and he knew it would be done faster than the post. His valise was closed at last, and the taxi was at the door. There were handshakes, and there were not. Frobisher offered one, and Poirot took it. It is good for men to practice humility the way they once practiced boastfulness. Colonel Fanshawe saluted, and Poirot returned it as if they were both soldiers, which in a sense they had been. Lady Ventnor inclined her head with that particular precision of grief that is neither ostentation nor apology. Evelyn walked with him to the threshold. She did not say thank you because she was not a girl any more and did not see herself as one. She said, "I will write the letters today," and he understood he had been thanked in the only coin she valued. "Remember," he said, "be brave when no one can see." She smiled, more in the eyes than in the mouth. "It turns out that is easier than being brave, when they can." "Ah," he said, "that is a lesson very few learn. Do not forget it when the flowers arrive." He got into the taxi and looked once more at the front of Ashcombe House. The red brick was honest, the windows were clean, the steps were brushed. On the gravel, the marks of yesterday's wheels had almost gone. The day had made its own pattern. As they turned toward the gate, he thought, as he sometimes allowed himself to think, of the curious fact that one can commit a murder by an affront to order. It is a delicate sin, the sin of those who cannot endure the world unless it is measured to their foot. Such people are useful in small things and devastating in great ones. He adjusted his hat in the glass, the brim straight as a rule, and smiled at his own vanity, which, being confessed, did no harm. In the village, he asked the driver to stop by the post. He wrote a line on a card to Inspector Barnaby. "The trolleys smear. Do not forget. It will please the jury." And another to a colleague in town about an appointment that might be arranged for a widow and 2 children in Whitstable Lane to see a certain charitable gentleman who likes the word discreet. He posted them and took his seat again. At the bend, Ashcombe House was already half hidden by its own trees. Poirot leaned back and allowed himself the comfort of a thought that he would not cheapen by speaking aloud, that a house in which a butler dies can be put right without pretending he did not live. When the taxi joined the London road, he said, chiefly to his moustache, "And now, Hercule, we will have a very good lunch, and then a nap, and we will not rearrange the chairs in the restaurant even if they are wrong. We will be precise, but we will not be tyrants." The road to London gave Poirot the leisure to rehearse the case as a musician runs his scales before closing his piano. The notes fell as they had been played. A tag turned inward, a chord newly cut, the faint ring where a bell cord had steadied an impatient hand, a grain lodged like a thorn in the groove of a collar, a left hand that wrote neatly and gripped poorly with its 4th finger, a telephone voice that could not bear an unlocked idea. He possessed no triumph, only the composure of a room put back as it ought to be. 2 days later, Inspector Barnaby's letter arrived, careful and unadorned. Mr. Partridge had given a statement that would impress a secretary and irritate a jury. "I meant to correct, not to kill," he had said, and then, with a barrister's neatness, destroyed his own mercy by explaining the precision of the collar, the pleasure of a seal pressed smooth, the confidence that a prudent man would faint obligingly in a narrow passage where his body could be attended to with decorum. "The chemist," Barnaby wrote, "prefers facts to sermons. Cyanide is not a fainting salt." As for Mrs. Melrose, the charge had been reduced to mischief with intent to injure. A magistrate with a good coat and a cold eye had found room for both pity and censure. She will trouble no servants again. She has discovered that order resists tantrum. Poirot put the letter away and kept the last line only, because it pleased him to be reminded that the English make phrases without knowing they have done it. Sir Henry's note came the next morning, 2 sentences written as squarely as he stood. The inquest had returned the simplest verdict the facts allowed. The funeral would be from the front door. It was his house too, Sir Henry wrote, and the words had in them no fashion and no apology. They needed none. The post brought also a card in a hand he now recognized at once. Evelyn Ashcombe's, precise, without prettiness. "We went to Whitstable Lane," she wrote. "Mrs. Bright carries a basket the way some carry a flag. Mrs. Reeve has a child who makes boats out of paper, and a girl who corrects his folding. They will not burden anyone. We took the pantry money. Aunt wrote a cheque. Colonel Fanshawe appeared at the very moment when we did not know whether to be proud or practical, and showed us how to be both. I have written to Mr. Garston with kindness. There will be no scene." Beneath, in a smaller line, as if a smile had stepped to the edge of the paper, "Mr. Greaves's watch keeps time again." Poirot went down to Kent for the funeral, because propriety is sweetest when it is not demanded. The red brick of Ashcombe House looked older in mourning, and more honest for it. The villagers came in their good coats and clean boots, and stood as people stand who have long memories, but do not rehearse them. Thomas held himself straighter than his coat could manage, and blinked when the hymn faltered, then found the next line without stumbling. Annie was as white as laundry in winter, but did not weep until the vicar used the word faithful, and then only enough to make her human. Mrs. Bright stood with her hands folded into the habit that had been her dignity for years, and allowed herself, at the end, the indulgence of touching the coffin as it passed, as one touches a table one has laid. After, Sir Henry poured the last of the true Armagnac, and finished it with his household. No tradition, only a courtesy. He invited Poirot to say a word, and was relieved when he did not. In grief, men need not be instructed. Poirot contented himself with a very small suggestion, spoken for Lady Ventnor's ear alone, that Thomas be trusted for a time with a steward's duties, while Mrs. Bright's authority be made formal. "A house," he said, "likes its map-makers to be too." Lady Ventnor, who had never thought to find comfort in a ledger, nodded once. A promotion as a way of remembering, a share of control as a way of forgiving. Frobisher cornered Poirot by the library fire with the contrition of a man who has learned something he cannot show in a club. "I have given Sir Henry a list of what is true and what is polite," he said. "I apologize to Mrs. Bright for my voice, and to the green chair for trying to sit like a duke in a vicarage. You will not think me a better man for saying so. I am not, only less careless." "It is already an improvement," Poirot answered. "Carelessness, she is the cousin of vanity. Keep them from marrying." Colonel Fanshawe came and stood with the particular awkwardness of kind men. "The widow will not be spoken of," he muttered, as if delivering a password. "But she will do. I have seen to 1 or 2 little practicalities that do not bear conversation." He looked relieved when Poirot merely bowed. Before leaving, Poirot made one last small round. He stood in the service passage, where the air no longer held the faint metallic insult, and touched the bell cord that was properly innocent again. He paused at the cellar door, and did not open it. He went to Mr. Greaves's room, now bare of the ledger, and the spectacles, and the school Virgil. The bed had been stripped, the throw folded, the little drawer empty of everything but the clean smell of soap. Mrs. Bright found him there and said nothing. People who keep houses understand that rooms require farewells. On the drive, he met Evelyn returning from the kitchen garden, her hands chapped, her expression not tragic, only remade. "I have written the letters," she said. "We will keep the front door open after dinner for a quarter of an hour, as he did. The house breathes better." "Just so," Poirot said, and looked once at the green chair through the window, where Mrs. Bright had left it, with its casters correctly set. His eyes did not ask to nudge it into any remembered rightness. "You will be happy," he added, not as a promise, but as permission. "I shall be tidy," she said, with a touch of his own dryness. "The rest will be what it is." He returned to London and allowed himself the foolish luxury of ordering his lunch as if it were a plan for a room. One thing to balance another, nothing on the plate that lied. After lunch, he wrote 2 notes, one to Barnaby, reminding him, because policemen like their proofs to be round, that the grey smear on the trolley would marry the resin from the collar, and one to a gentleman who did good with a distaste for the word charity, recommending 3 names and an address on Whitstable Lane. "They will not come asking," he wrote. "Send a bill with your kindness." A week later, the newspapers managed their own tidy, a column of 3 inches with a headline that said nothing and a paragraph that said a little more. "Retired barrister charged, unusual method alleged." The rest was left to be told in shops and over hedges, where stories live if they deserve to. Poirot kept no clippings. He did not collect men's failures. Barnaby came up to town at the end of the month and made a report over coffee that was unflattered by adjectives. The chemistry had done its pedestrian work. The law, its heavy. We'll see whether the bench fancies the word prepared attached to murder, he said. "I fancy it myself. Our man is of the type that believes nouns are opinions. A verdict will educate him." "And Madame Melrose?" Poirot asked. "She will be bored under supervision," Barnaby replied. "It may yet do her good." Poirot walked him to the door. "It is a consoling occupation," he observed, "to put small words in their right order until a large wrong thing cannot stand." "Is that what you do?" Barnaby asked, amused for once. "I thought you tidied rooms." "Parbleu," Poirot said. "It is the same." April warmed the pavements enough that London looked briefly benevolent. Poirot allowed himself to walk without a purpose, and found that his feet took him to a shop where watches are repaired by men who do not pretend. He looked at the trays and the small faces that blinked like polite animals, and did not buy. On his way out, he adjusted the brim of his hat in the glass, and sounded himself gently. Vanity, yes, confessed and kept in its cage. A last letter from Ashcombe House came in May. It was short because happiness is the enemy of correspondence. Thomas had been named steward. Mrs. Bright was housekeeper indeed as well as name. Lady Ventnor had given the vicar a list that made him work for his living. The tennis court had been rolled, the hyacinths had gone over, and the roses had begun. "We keep the front door open a quarter of an hour after dinner," Evelyn wrote. "Sometimes the night says nothing. Sometimes it says that order can be kind." There was a postscript in a different hand, angular and brave. "The children fold the boats properly now." Poirot smiled and put the letter where he kept other maps that had proved themselves. He took out, to amuse himself, the collar marked A, which Inspector Barnaby had returned with the evidences that were no longer needed. He held it a moment, and then wrapped it in brown paper, and addressed it to Sir Henry with a single line, "When it has forgotten." He sent it, and sat a while with his chocolate, satisfied to have put even that small tyrant out of his drawer. He could, had anyone coaxed him, have made a speech about the murder at Ashcombe House, and the vanity of the careful, the poison of a mind that believes a thing is true because it is tidy. He did not. He said only to his own reflection, which is the one audience that does not applaud, to be precise is good, to be a tyrant is fatal. Then he took up his hat, placed it so that its line pleased without commanding, and went out, content to leave chairs as he found them unless the room itself asked him otherwise. Now, generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs, delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective style.